At dusk, the setting sun cast long shadows of the carriages and horses. Having informed Benson and Melissa that he was having dinner at the Blackthorn Security Company, Klein headed to the harbor with old Neil on a public carriage. He was dressed in cheap formal attire, afraid that conflict might break out in such a complicated location. If he damaged his tuxedo, which he took painstaking care of, he would probably cry his heart out. When the sunlight appeared to turn fiery, the carriage stopped. Old Neil, in his usual classic black robe and felt black hat with a rounded edge, ignored the gazes of others and walked diagonally to the Evil Dragon bar in ahead of them. Even though the bar was slightly far away and the heavy doors were tightly shut, Klein still heard wave after wave of rapturous shouts. They appeared to be cheering on a hero. When he came close, he suddenly sensed something. He turned his head towards the warehouse opposite to the bar. He saw a stocky man dressed in a uniform standing at a hidden corner on the rooftop. The man carried a huge grayish-white mechanical box and held a thick rifle in his hand. The grayish-white mechanical box was obviously connected to the same colored rifle via piping. Steam-pressured rifle? Klein muttered in shock. He looked at old Neil and said, "This bar can actually obtain such weapons?" That was a military-controlled item. Although it used extracted phlogiston-1, the size and weight of the steam backpack were still shocking, something only a true warrior of blood and iron could withstand. The rifle had an extremely high muzzle velocity and shocking destructive power too. Matched with a suitable scope, it was nearly equivalent to an inferior sniper rifle. What? Old Neil squinted his eyes as he looked over, having a confused look too. Did something happen here? Something happened? Klein surveyed his surroundings and discovered a few more men holding repeating rifles who were searching for something. What happened? Old Neil approached the bar and asked the brawny man guarding its door outside. The brawny man obviously knew old Neil and smiled wryly. The bar was nearly destroyed earlier. Apparently a wanted man was here trying to buy materials and was recognized. And this was what resulted from it. Oh Lord, what did he do and how dangerous was he to receive such treatment? My legs went limp seeing all those firearms, limper than after spending an entire night with Ginger Sonny. He did not know the identity of the wanted man, much less know that the people who came to buy materials had Beyonders mixed in. Wanted man? Do you know his name? Old Neil asked in interest. I think it was Triss or something, the brawny man answered uncertainly. Instigator Triss? Klein nodded in enlightenment, having understood what was happening. Triss did not know that Joyce Meyer had cast his suspicion on him. Therefore he had sauntered right into the market to purchase materials without heed. He was likely recognized by an informant of either the machinery hive mind or the Nighthawks, resulting in an intense clash. Was he caught? Klein tapped his silver-inlaid black cane. Based on the surrounding situation, likely not. The brawny man shook his head slightly and gestured with his chin to the rooftop of the warehouse opposite him. He rushed out before those terrifying guys arrived. Bloody hell, I've never seen a man run faster than he did. You haven't seen the true skills of an assassin, or you might be taken away to some indescribable place for further re-education. Klein thought. Is the market still open? Old Neil changed subjects and asked. It just restored operations, replied the brawny man affirmatively. That's great. Old Neil quickened his pace and extended his right hand, pushing open the heavy door. Klein followed closely in tow and walked in. He nearly fainted at the stuffiness and smell of alcohol that inundated him. In the middle of Evil Dragon Bar was a boxing ring. Two half-naked men were in an intense brawl and surrounding them were dozens of customers shouting and cheering on the side they supported with no lack of vulgarities. Old Neil ignored them and led Klein around the boxing ring and walked into a billiard room at the back. In the billiard room, there were two people holding cue sticks having a casual conversation. When they saw old Neil enter, they instantly fell silent for a few seconds. After confirming the visitor's identity, they moved aside and let old Neil and Klein pass through the secret door behind them. After passing through a few rooms, the sight before Klein's eyes opened up. He saw a place that was about the size of a lecture hall from his previous life. Some vendors had set up roadside stalls with bottles and cans all over. Passers-by strolled through them, either scrutinizing their goods, chatting, or comparing prices. They have to give 5% of their profits to Swain. He is the boss of Evil Dragon Bar, former captain of a mandated Punisher squad and older than I am. He's someone who wishes to drink himself to his death, Old Neil explained in a garrulous manner. Klein thought and gave an honest evaluation. A rather profitable business. After all, his only expense was providing the venue and protection. If any item catches your fancy but you lack the money, you can borrow from Swain. But of course he charges a very high interest. Old Neil trailed off as he gnashed his teeth. As expected, it's like running a casino. They would provide usuries. Klein held his walking stick and looked around as he asked curiously, Mr. Swain is a seafarer? The captain of a mandated Punisher squad was likely a Sequence 7. No, he is only a folk of rage. Tingen is not a coastal city, so the Church of the Goddess is much more powerful than Lord of Storms here. Old Neil scoffed. Actually, Swain had the chance of becoming a seafarer, but was afraid that he would lose control, so he chose to give up. Just as Klein was about to ask if the boss of the bar had any experience of nearly losing control, he suddenly felt a strange phenomenon happen on his left. There appeared to be something hidden there, muttering and recounting. Klein turned his head and saw a pale young man. He was wearing an old linen shirt and blue jeans that the working class normally wore. His eyes looked demoralized with a hint of craziness, and he was constantly mumbling. His spiritual perception is very high, or perhaps distorted? Klein creased his eyebrows and muttered. It was the young man's spiritual perception that triggered his own spiritual perception. Generally speaking, spiritual perception, sensing something, causes some interaction. It was nearly impossible to conceal it from others, but others referred to spirit mediums who had cast their abilities, as well as powerful figures with similar special traits. A beyonder like Klein would actually find it hard to detect, only detecting if one's spiritual perception reached a certain heightened level, or an abnormal distortion happened. They made eye contact, and the pale young man with messy black hair walked towards him with an expression looking as though he was half sleepwalking and half insane. He stopped before Klein and stared at him. Suddenly he guffawed. It's the smell of death. Before he was done talking, he suddenly screamed tragically. His eyes shut tightly as liquid with the color of blood flowed out. Darn it! The young man covered his eyes and hugged his head. He struggled on the ground and only calmed down after a while. He then lay there panting. During the entire process, not a single customer or stall vendor looked over. Klein pressed down his half-top hat and looked at Old Neil. Klein's mouth was hanging open in shock, using his actions to demonstrate his shock and to request for advice. Don't mind him. He's Adamasol, an orphan nicknamed Monster. He was born with high spiritual perception, and he has always been able to see things that he shouldn't, hear voices that he shouldn't. Hence he is always raving and often getting hurt. Old Neil shook his head as he explained. He could tell that my body was once dead. Klein knitted his eyebrows and lowered his voice as he asked in doubt. Haven't the Nighthawks, mandated Punishers, or the Machinery Hive Mind ever thought of taking him in? No, we do not have the sequence potion that suits him, said Old Neil with a sigh. Right, he was born with the starting point of half a sequence. Klein asked again curiously. What sequence pathway suits him? The sequence 9 that suits him is called Monster. His nickname came from there. It's a pity that only the Life School of Thought has control over the sequence pathway's beginning, Old Neil replied softly. He tried to keep the conversation between him and Klein from the people around them to avoid leaking information to mysticism aficionados. Life School of Thought? Klein recalled the information he had previously read. The secret organization appeared in the beginning of the current epoch. Its actual origins were unknown, but it was mainly passed down via master and disciple. Their theories and beliefs were hardly known. Klein only knew that they separated the world into 3 layers. The definite rational world, also known as the absolute truth world, the spirits world, and the material world. Rumor had it that the secret organization had once produced a soothsayer. Wasn't that a sequence pathway that corresponded to Seer? Confusing, really confusing. Klein shook his head and saw Adamasol struggle to get up and then wander off to another corner. He reorganized his thoughts and followed behind old Neil. They walked past one stall after another. There were plants like moonflower, fingered citron, night vanilla, and mineral resources like silver, topaz, ruby and so on. It's really very well equipped, Klein muttered softly. The mysticism aficionados of all ages and genders around him would be stopping, distinguishing or talking at times. It gave the area a bustling vibe. Walk around on your own. I am going to settle my bill. Old Neil pointed at one of the 2 rooms at the end. All right. Klein nodded without thought. He strolled with his black cane and came before a stall which sold self-made amulets. He took a careful look at it for a while. Just when Klein prepared to speak with the seller, he suddenly heard someone asking the stall behind him, "Is this powder ground from cow teeth pianol? Cow teeth pianol? Isn't that one of the supplementary ingredients of the spectator potion?" Klein thought, then turned around to look at the inquirer. Justice had repeated the formula for the potion several times, so Klein had been left with a remarkably clear impression of the ingredients. Klein looked over and saw the person inquiring about the cow teeth pianol. The man was less than a meter away from him. He was wearing a black suit and a half-top hat of the same color. He had a cane adorned with silver in his hand and a pair of gold-framed spectacles on his face. He had a refined bearing. "Yes, do you need it? This can here costs 3 soli." The owner of the stall was wearing a long black robe, one filled mysticism traits. The inquirer, whose sideburns were pale yellow, thought for a moment before saying, "Can it be cheaper? I still need to buy other ingredients too. For example, this bottle of white-edged sunflower petals." The stall owner considered for a few seconds before grudgingly replying, 2 soli and 6 pence. "I don't think you can find a price cheaper than that." Klein immediately felt that he was overthinking things after seeing how the bespectacled man was buying ingredients other than the cow teeth pianol. However, he still tapped his glabella twice as an act of caution. He swept the man with his spirit vision. "No problems. He looks very healthy. His emotions are all right too. Mister, you need to keep this up." Klein retracted his gaze, turned around and looked at the stall selling homemade amulets once again. The amulets were placed neatly before him. Some of them were made of pure silver, some with steel, others forged from gold. But only a few of the amulets had a weak aura emanating from them, some crimson, some pale white, some golden. This meant that some of them had weak traces of spirituality and were definitely effective to a certain extent. Klein looked at the amulets carefully and confirmed that the stall owner making the amulets had some foundation in mysticism. The stall owner did not make any mistakes matching the different energy sources to the different incantations. He was also extremely accurate at choosing the materials that corresponded to the different energy sources. Of course, a mere mysticism aficionado would definitely make some mistakes. Klein noticed that the stall owner did not fully understand the incantations. One could not create an incantation simply by translating the content of the prayer into Hermes. The incantations had to follow a certain format that followed unique rules. The other problem was that the stall owner had made mistakes of varying degrees when he was choosing a suitable symbol for the energy sources. That explained why there were only 2 or 3 amulets releasing the faint light out of the dozens that were laid before him. As for how much of an effect the 2 to 3 amulets would have, Klein could only say that it was better than nothing. An amulet that was truly equipped with obvious effects needed the craftsman to release his spirituality from a blade while carving the incantations and symbols. If one wanted even better results, they would have to supplement it with ritualistic magic. And these 2 things were not something an ordinary person could achieve. Klein tapped his glabella twice, then pointed at the upper left corner of the stall with his black cane. "How much for these 2? He did not ask about the amulets that had a rudimentary colored aura, but half-completed items. Other than external shape, they had not been carved with incantations or symbols. To Klein there was no reason to purchase the amulets that had weak effects. What he wanted to do was to transform the half-completed amulets into true amulets. I'll make amulets that can protect a person from danger, 1 each for Benson and Melissa. As for my own, I can ask the Nighthawks to supply me with the ingredients. Man, I must have been influenced by old Neil. I don't feel any guilt when doing something like that. Klein's mind wandered as he watched the stall owner pick up the half-completed silver amulets. The first silver amulet was elongated and had a cavity in the middle. Around it were patterns of angel-like feathers. The craftsmanship was intricate and was very beautiful. The other was simple, almost completely devoid of any additional decorations or carvings. It had a vertical line representing the night, and a circle representing the crimson moon. Klein, who paid much attention to appearances, took a liking to them immediately. "This is 6 soli," the middle-aged stall owner said, pointing to the intricate amulet. He was a man of few words. After pausing for a while, he rubbed the simpler piece and said, "This is 5 soli 3 pence. That's too expensive. They are still far from being an amulet." Klein had slowly been influenced by Benson and Melissa, so he had begun cultivating the habit of haggling. After a battle of words, he bought the 2 silver accessories at 5 soli 6 pence and 4 soli 9 pence respectively. Yeah, they can only be considered silver accessories for the time being. Klein had that in mind. The 10 soli 3 pence was deducted from the reimbursement he received for his divination club membership. Klein received the 2 silver accessories and placed them into his pocket. He was about to head to another stall when he heard a gentle voice. "Sir, why are you not buying a completed amulet?" Klein turned his head over and found a teenage girl asking him the question. She was about 15 years of age and wore a lacy yellow dress while holding onto a veiled hat with a ribbon. "It's because I intend to make my own amulets. As you know, that is the wish of every aficionado of mysticism." Klein minced his words and answered. He did not wish to make the stall owner think that he was trying to snatch his business, even though he had considered using his skill to earn a quick buck. The teenage girl had naturally curly brown hair, and her face was adorable due to her baby fat. She looked at Klein with her light blue eyes and asked sincerely, "Can I seek your advice on choosing an amulet? Well, I was introduced here by a friend. I've been here several times and have a deep interest in mysticism. But I still do not know too much about it, and she, my friend, is going to turn 16 soon. I wish to select an amulet as a gift to her. I didn't bring her along as I wanted to be a surprise. I had previously sought her advice, but I cannot remember a lot of the critical points." Klein gave a gentlemanly smile. "What kind of protection amulets are you looking for? Something to avert disasters? Something to avoid illnesses? Something that gives fortune?" Different requirements would require different energy sources, which means that they must point to different gods. Different gods would have different corresponding constellations, and the different constellations would mean that different materials have to be used. For example, the incantation for averting disasters would belong to the Empress of Disaster and Horror, who is the Evernight goddess. As mysticism aficionados, we all know that the symbol of the Evernight goddess is the moon. The corresponding metal would thus be pure silver. Therefore, if we hope to avert disasters, it is best that we choose an amulet that is made of pure silver and has the corresponding incantations. We would also have to make sure that the incantations are of the correct language and format. The corresponding symbol of the Empress of Disaster and Horror means the path number, the spell's characteristic, and the relative positions of the symbols, etc., must also be correct. But this is too complicated, and there's no need for me to explain this for you," Klein added inwardly. The girl's eyes sparkled. She asked with a little doubt, "Can a follower of the goddess wear an amulet belonging to another god?" "No problem. The gods do not mind such small matters," Klein consoled her. It was not a problem for the person wearing the amulet, but the person creating the amulet had to be careful. If a believer of the Lord of Storms were to craft an amulet of the eternal blazing sun, they would most likely receive something malicious. Of course, these referred to amulets requiring the aid of ritualistic magic. The craftsman need not pay much attention to this otherwise. The teenage girl heaved a sigh of relief. "I hope to get her an amulet for good health. Which deity should I choose from? The eternal blazing sun, Mother Earth, or the god of knowledge and wisdom?" There should be no problem with the eternal blazing sun and Mother Earth. The former is represented by the sun while the latter is represented by the brown star. Klein smiled as he said, "The material of the sun is gold, while the metal that symbolizes the brown star is lead. I would suggest the sun, but I do not know if you brought enough money along with you. The reason for his suggestion was because he had noticed that among the 3 amulets with a rudimentary spiritual glow, one of them was a health amulet that came under the domain of the sun. Isn't this? Before the teenage girl finished her sentence, she stopped and warily looked at the stall owner who was waiting silently. She thought for a moment before asking, "After I decide on the material, how should I distinguish the incantation and corresponding symbols?" "Do you know Hermes?" Klein asked instead. "I just started learning it," the teenage girl replied, a little embarrassed. "Then let me choose it for you." Klein pointed at the health amulet made of gold and said, "This one has no problems, be it in the incantations or the representing symbol." The teenage girl lifted the edges of her dress and squatted in front of the amulet. She picked up the health amulet with designs of the sun's rays around its edges. She felt as though the amulet was nourishing her, making her feel completely relaxed. Thank you, thank you." She stood up and curtsied in gratitude. Klein laughed and said, "I'll leave the rest to you and the stall owner. I have other things to tend to." He looked at the stall owner as he spoke and noticed that the man had a weird look in his eyes, as if deciding if he had to give a cut of the profit to Klein. With a smile, Klein did not bother with the matter anymore. He continued touring the underground market, but he didn't notice any true extraordinary materials. At this point, old Neil had already paid off his debt. He was holding a dark-colored wooden box in his hands. He pointed to the other room behind and said after he noticed Klein's look of doubt, "Go there if you wish to buy or sell extraordinary materials. After all, no one wishes to let others know what extraordinary items they are purchasing." "I understand." Klein nodded as though in thought. There was no need for him to go there for the time being. He headed toward the exit of the underground market together with old Neil. "How much for these elf flowers?" A query suddenly entered Klein's ears. "Elf flowers. That's also an ingredient for the spectator potion," Klein thought as he glanced sideways. He once again saw the refined, bespectacled man. "What's the matter?" old Neil asked curiously. "Nothing much." Klein retracted his gaze. Although he was a quasi-member of the Nighthawks, he did not feel that all Beyonders had to be absorbed by the churches or locked up. He believed that it had to depend on the situation. Spectators definitely posed little danger to society or the kingdom, and the chances of losing control as a Sequence 9 were very slim. After leaving Evil Dragon Bar, Klein and old Neil took a public carriage and left the harbor. They then split ways at the North Borough and headed back to their respective homes. The public transport steered into Daffodil Street and stopped by the side of the road. Klein was about to get off the carriage when he suddenly saw a young lady wearing a grayish-white dress about to board the carriage. This lady had smooth black hair, her face a little round. She had thin eyes and unassuming features. But paired together she gave off the feeling that she was sweet and gentle. Klein noticed her not because of her beauty, but because he discovered that her body was shuddering slightly. It was an unnatural shudder. "Miss, are you all right?" Klein asked in concern. The young lady shook her head abruptly. "No, I am just too tired." The people behind Klein were urging for him to get off, so Klein could only leave the carriage. When he found his footing, he paid attention to the situation from before again. He pinched his glabella twice, planning to determine if the lady was indeed all right. He had the intention of sending her to the hospital if she had a serious illness that was going to act up soon. Activating his spirit vision, the colors of the auras started to surface. Klein turned around and prepared to look at the sweet and gentle young lady. Clip-clop, clip-clop. The horses widened their paces as the wheels began rolling in tow. Despite activating his spirit vision and turning around, hoping to observe the refined and sweet lady, Klein did not have his wishes fulfilled. All his eyes reflected were brown figures moving past him. Meanwhile, the passengers from the stop had already boarded the carriage. The carriage door was closed tightly as it gradually departed. Within the carriage, 20 to 30 people stood closely to each other, their energy fields overlapping and shielding each other. Hence, it was an explosion of colors in Klein's vision, making it difficult for him to differentiate. He shook his head quietly and raised his finger to tap his glabella to deactivate his spirit vision. To him, it was simply help he could provide if he happened to chance upon it. However, if he were to miss it and the situation was not especially clear, there was no point taking it to heart and delaying his own matters. While bathing in the crimson moonlight, Klein strolled back home on the still bustling Daffodil Street. He returned to see Melissa sitting beside the dining table. She was busy doing her homework under a bright gas lamp. She bit at the fountain pen and frowned, appearing deep in thought. "Where's Benson?" Klein asked casually. Melissa looked up. She blanked out for a few seconds before saying, "He said he went around a few boroughs today and was covered in sweat. He's taking a nice relaxing bath." "All right." Klein chuckled. Suddenly, he realized that she was wearing a dress he had never seen before. It was entirely beige in color. It had fashionable engagiantes. The collar and edges of her top had thin frills. Apart from that, it was a rather simple design, the type one wore as daily casual clothing. It fully accentuated the youth of a 16 or 17-year-old. "New dress?" Klein asked with a smile. It was a purchase that he and Benson had insisted upon. Melissa answered in the affirmative tersely. "I just took it back from Mrs. Rochelle. I was thinking that since I had to wash it later, I might as well try it on first." Klein was rather puzzled when he heard that. "Mrs. Rochelle? Wasn't she our former neighbor?" Melissa nodded and explained in all seriousness. "Mrs. Rochelle is actually a seamstress, but she was quite unlucky. She had no choice but to sew and mend clothes for others at home. She leads a pretty tough life. I knew that she had pretty good skill, and the price she quoted is cheaper than at a women's clothing store. Furthermore, it's very well tailored to my figure, so I ordered a new skirt from her. It only cost 9 soldi and 5 pence and took only a few days. A dress of a similar style would cost 3/2 of a pound at Harrods department store." "What a frugal girl. Sis, I know that at least half the reason is due to your pity of Mrs. Rochelle." Klein did not reproach Melissa for deciding things for herself. Instead, he said with a smile, "When did you go to Harrods?" "That was at House Street, near the Divination Club. It was somewhere where the middle class shopped." Melissa was momentarily at a loss for words. It took her a long while before she said, "It was Selina and Elizabeth. They insisted I accompany them. I actually prefer gears more. I like places with steam and machinery. Yeah. It's quite, nice for a girl to occasionally shop at a department store." Klein laughed as he comforted his sister. After some idle talk, he briskly walked to the second floor, hoping to wash away the repulsive mixed smells from the bar. Just as he was about to return to his bedroom to get a change of clothes, he suddenly heard sounds coming from the bathroom close to the balcony. A few seconds later, Benson stepped out while drying his gradually receding hairline. "How was it? Did you compliment Melissa's new dress?" He shot a glance at Klein and asked with a smile. "I guess I forgot. All I did was ask where it was done." Klein thought for a moment as he said. Benson immediately chortled and shook his head. How unbecoming of an elder brother. When Melissa received the dress, she couldn't bear putting it down. After rushing to cook and wash the dishes, she immediately wore the dress and has refused to take it off ever since. Wasn't she planning on changing after showering? She can wash and starch the clothes while doing so. Klein subconsciously refuted with the explanation that Melissa had given. "Tisk." Benson sighed. "It's been scorching the past few days. She was busy in the kitchen for a long time, so I believe she would feel much better doing her homework after a shower." "That's right." Klein was suddenly enlightened as he gave his brother a knowing smile. "So that's what kind of person you are, Melissa. There's nothing wrong with a girl caring for her appearance. There's no need to find excuses." The corners of his mouth curved up as he shook his head gently before walking into his bedroom. While he was showering, Klein faintly heard knocking downstairs. He immediately wondered. Doesn't the worker who's in charge of collecting coins for the gas meter come only once every 2 weeks? Could it be Mrs. Shout from next door? That can't be. It's said that this lady strictly abides by the etiquette of middle-class society. She would not visit at an inappropriate time. In his puzzlement, Klein wiped dry his body. Wearing old but comfortable shirt and trousers, he came down the stairs. He surveyed the area but did not notice any strangers. He asked, Was someone at the door just now? Benson, who was reading the newspapers casually, said with a smile. It was Bitch Mountbatten, one of the policemen in charge of Iron Cross Street. He asked if we met an 18 or 19-year-old boy who has a rotund face. He even gave us a sketch to identify. Unfortunately, neither one of us have seen him, or we would have received a reward. What about you? Nope. Klein had a general idea what was happening. Instigator Triss had successfully escaped the Evil Dragon Bar at the harbor. He had escaped somewhere close to Iron Cross Street and Daffodil Street. Therefore, the police were making visits from door to door. And to go this far made it clear that the operation of nabbing the instigator had completely failed. Klein did not bother himself with the situation. He had yet to begin combat training. He only had basic mastery of shooting, so to consider dealing with a natural assassin was simply using his life as a joke. He did not sleep well that night. He kept worrying that the instigator would infiltrate their house to hide, causing another massacre. Thankfully, Daffodil Street was quiet the entire night, with the morning sun rays dispersing all the fog. The relaxed Klein changed into formal attire, wore his top hat, held his cane and went all the way to Zetland Street. He greeted Roseanne at the reception hall. "Good morning, Klein," replied Roseanne happily. She suppressed her voice and said, "I heard the huge operation last night failed?" "The operation to nab instigator Triss?" Klein asked in curiosity. "Yeah." Roseanne nodded heavily. She shot a glance at the partition and said, "Apparently an informant of the mandated punishers discovered the instigator at the harbor. They were planning on waiting for additional Beyonders and another special operations squad from the police to arrive before beginning the operation to do the deed instantly without alarming the commoners. Unfortunately, that instigator was extremely sharp. He charged out of the encirclement when he noticed something amiss, successfully escaping as a result. At such times they need a Beyonder with tracking abilities such as me." Klein made a joke. There was no lack of trackers back then. Dunn Smith's voice suddenly sounded. Roseanne turned her head abruptly and saw the captain wearing his black windbreaker. He was glaring right at her with his deep pair of gray eyes while leaning against the partition's frame. She hurriedly raised her hands to cover her mouth. Then she shook her head incessantly, expressing her futile innocence. Dunn turned his gaze to Klein and after some thought he said, "There were a total of 6 Beyonders from the mandated punishers, the machinery hive mind and us Nighthawks. We traced the injured Triss to Iron Cross Street's lower street. We found his temporary residence, but the clues ended there. Be it Beyonder methods or ordinary investigations, nothing worked. It was as though he evaporated into thin air, disappearing completely. Do you need my help with divination?" Klein asked probingly. Dunn shook his head gently. "The machinery hive mind had a machinery hive mind. He is a senior Beyonder as good as old Neil. I even suspect that he's already at sequence 8. I'm just unaware what the name of the corresponding potion is. The Theosophy Order's heritage to this day must have something special about it," consoled Klein. For the rest of the morning he continued his mysticism curriculum, read the historical information and documents, and practiced various techniques just like always. With lunchtime almost approaching, Klein's mind began to wander. Another few minutes later, he put away the documents, having heard the summoning of his stomach. At that moment, Dunn Smith came into the clerk office. He said in a deep but mild manner, "Klein, follow me to Cheney's Gate. Sealed artifact 2-049 has arrived. The subsequent operation might require your sensing of that notebook." "All right," Klein got up and replied. His thoughts became scrambled. He imagined how the sealed item would look or if the operation would be dangerous. While in this rather tense silence he followed Dunn down the stairs and into the tunnel. After going straight at the intersection, Dunn suddenly stopped and turned his head, saying sternly, "Do this action together with me. Keep doing it and absolutely do not stop. Remember, absolutely do not stop. This is for your own safety." While speaking, Dunn bent his arm followed by extending it. He repeated this action without stopping. Klein looked at the captain demonstrate in a befuddled manner. Suddenly enlightened, he asked, "Has this got to do with the uniqueness of the sealed artifact?" "Yes." Dunn nodded with abnormal seriousness. Repeating such an action will allow us to discover if anything happens to you immediately. Saving you in time will not result in any life-threatening dangers. Okay. Klein did not hesitate further as he began the repeated action of bending and extending his arm. If your arm is sore, use the other one, added Dunn. Sealed Artifact 2-049. Sure is odd. What meaning does this action have? Seems very dangerous. These thoughts flashed past Klein's mind as he looked solemnly at the captain. All right. He had too many questions on his mind, but since Cheney's gate was in sight, he had no choice but to bear with it. Besides, with my security clearance, I'll probably not learn of the details. I can only do as I'm ordered. Klein exhaled as he followed Captain Dunn to the keeper room outside Cheney's gate. Klein repeatedly bent and extended his arm as he watched Dunn push open the keeper's room with his body sideways. The captain's carefulness and high alertness, as well as the ridiculous and laughable protective actions, left him feeling abnormally tensed. The feeling was identical to what he felt when taking tests of courage that required him to walk through spooky cemeteries at night in his youth. A Grade 2 sealed artifact. Dangerous. To be used with care and moderation. It is something even a formal Nighthawk member does not know the details to. It is unknown how dangerous it is. Amid his tense nerves, Klein found it impossible to curb himself from overthinking. At that moment, his brain suddenly turned numb as though a power switch had been flicked off. Everything in Klein's vision turned slow. Even his arm actions shared the same fate. He saw Captain Dunn stop in his tracks. He came close to him as though in slow motion, extending his palm out slowly before pushing him in the shoulder. Suddenly, Klein's thought processes and vision were restored to normal at the same time. It was as though everything from before was just an illusion. What happened? He whispered amid his fright and confusion. Dunn shook his head and said in a deep voice, "Observe carefully." The moment he finished his sentence, he turned around and walked into the keeper's room. Klein followed closely behind and saw 4 other people in the room. They were either seated or standing. One of them was the midnight poet, Leonard. The other 3 were people Klein had never met before. However, all of them shared a common trait. They were all doing the extending and bending arm exercise, with utmost seriousness. Klein Moretti has a miraculous connection with the Antigonus family's notebook. Dunn gave a brief introduction. Then he pointed to the other 3 strangers and said, "These lady and gentlemen are colleagues from the Backlund Diocese. They escorted sealed artifact 2-049 here. This is Madame Laurata, Sequence 8 Gravedigger. She is a master sharpshooter." At that moment, the black-haired woman who looked about 30 nodded at Klein in a friendly manner. She looked pretty good. She did not wear a hat and was dressed in what appeared like male attire. A black coat with a white shirt, tight black trousers and black leather boots. The corners of her mouth were slightly curved up. After Klein exchanged greetings, Dunn pointed to a man seated behind the desk. "Ire Harson, someone just like me." Before he finished his sentence, Klein saw Mr. Ire Harson in his gray windbreaker turn sluggish with his arm motion. It was as though a gear had lost its lubricant or a joint covered in rust. "What's wrong?" Amid Klein's daze, he saw Laurata push Ire Harson. Only then did the gentleman's actions return to normal. "Was I like that previously?" Klein was first taken aback before he came to the realization. This indicated the dangers that sealed artifact 02-49 held. What would happen if one was not awoken in time? Would one become a zombie? Filled with questions, Klein greeted the charming middle-aged Ire Harson. "Borja," Dunn said as he pointed to the last Nighthawk. Borja was a cold man with a knife scar on the side of his face. His sharp brown eyes were like an eagle's. He was constantly observing everyone in the room. "Let's set off. The faster we end this, the faster we can seal 2-049, the handsome Ire Harson said as he stood, his eyes revealing some wrinkles. "So where is 2-049? Klein surveyed his surroundings curiously but did not notice any traces of the sealed artifact. Of course, he could not see the areas obscured by the table without activating his spirit vision. "All right," Dunn turned and looked at Leonard Mitchell. "You'll be in charge of driving. It is best not to involve Cesare with matters like this. Cesare was the clerk in charge of procuring and collecting supplies for the Tingen Nighthawks while standing in as a carriage driver. He was the one who drove Klein to Welch's home to meet the spirit medium daily. No problem. Leonard stopped acting frivolous and nodded seriously. At that moment Klein saw Iyer Harson bending over. He picked up a black metal chest which had been obscured by the table. The chest was carved with resplendent stars and the crimson full moon. It was as though there was a formless barrier around the chest. The sealed artifact should be inside there? I wonder what 2-049 looks like. Klein observed the chest curiously. Thump, thump, thump. Violent knocking sounds suddenly erupted from the black chest. Even the surface of the chest bulged time and time again. Thump, thump, thump. It was as though something horrifying had awakened within the chest and was pounding wildly. The sound of the knocking was beaten into the hearts of everyone present. It's alive? Just as Klein had a thought, he saw Captain Dunn's arm exercises turning sluggish, as if his joints were layered with glue. Borja, the Nighthawk from Backlund, pushed Dunn's shoulder, allowing him to recover. It's like doing the robot dance when one is affected by 2-049. If all of us are under its influence, wouldn't we be some awkward dance squad? Luckily, 2-049 seems capable of only influencing one person at a time. Klein lampooned to relax his tense nerves. He did not dare halt his arm exercises. He followed Dunn's lead and left his cane behind. He then followed behind the 5 Nighthawks through the tunnel and up the stairs to the second floor of the Blackthorn Security Company. Leonard had gone ahead and notified everyone in the front of the buildings, so Rosen and the rest had all made their way to the 3rd level. These incidents rarely involved them, but they were not completely alien to them. Another Nighthawk, Kenley, had replaced Dunn in his watch over Cheney's gate. Klein heaved a sigh of relief when he reached the carriage. He looked suspiciously out the window and said, "Won't 2-049 affect the ordinary people on the streets?" From their journey underground to the carriage, sealed artifact 2-049 had already caused 6 sluggish incidents, 2 of which were targeted at him. He had been jolted awake by Captain Dunn and Leonard Mitchell respectively. The rate of the sluggish effect was rather alarming. No worries, 2-049 will target humanoid creatures within 5 meters of it first. The closer you are to it, the easier it is for you to be chosen. As long as there are 3 people surrounding it, people who happen to be around when the carriage steers past will not be affected. The beautiful black-haired Lady Lorata explained with a lazy tone. What a weird sealed artifact. Klein thought as he continued his arm exercises. Dunn and the rest of the Nighthawks did not speak on the journey to Ray Bieber's house. They were paying close attention to each other's condition. Only Lorata wore a nonchalant look. At times she took in the sights of Tingen's not-so-clean streets, and at other times she praised Backlund's underground water system. Soon after, the familiar building finally entered Klein's line of sight. The group of 6 made their way to the 3rd level while observing each other. The door to Ray Bieber's house was labeled with the Tingen Police Department symbol, indicating that entry was forbidden to unauthorized personnel. As Dunn did his stretching exercises, he took out a key. He opened the newly changed lock, then turned around, allowing Iyer Harson, who was carrying the black chest, to enter first. Thump, 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 thump. The sealed artifact in the black chest knocked violently once again, even more violent than before. This made Iyer Harson's arm waver from side to side uncontrollably. It even made Klein suspect that the chest would be pounded open in time. Thump, thump, thump. Klein quickly noticed that Captain Dunn's movements were becoming sluggish. He was about to wake him up when a buzz sounded in his brain. His brain became numb, the scenes before his eyes played as though they were in slow motion. Didn't they say that it only affects one person at a time? Klein's thoughts quickly became sluggish. At this moment, the prepared Lorata and Borja woke each of them up respectively by pushing them. Having his thought processes and vision restored, Klein looked around with lingering fear. He nearly blurted out, "Didn't you say that 2-049 can only affect one person at a time?" Thankfully, I did not stop my stretches. When sealed artifact 2-049 enters its berserk mode, It can affect up to 2 people at once. We can confirm that Ray Bieber is indeed a descendant of the Antigonus family, Ayer Harson said with a mechanical tone. Lorota let out a faint laugh. She looked at Klein and said, 2-049 becomes very agitated when it meets a descendant of the Antigonus family, even if only their scent remains. Its abilities would also increase considerably. I believe you would be able to understand its feelings. Well, I don't. Klein asked curiously, so is it a living creature? Lorata smiled but did not reply him directly. You'll know in a while. As long as Ray Bieber hasn't escaped Tingen, 2-049 will lead us to him. Klein could only put his other questions on hold as he walked around the room with the Nighthawks. Amid the loud and violent thumping from the chest, they locked the door, walked down the stairs and returned to the carriage. Ayer Harson looked out the window several times and confirmed that there were no pedestrians within a 5-meter radius of them. He then placed the black chest on the ground and twisted the mechanical switch to release its spiritual restraints. The violent thumping stopped suddenly, slipping the entire carriage into silence. Not even the breaths of the Nighthawks could be heard. Klein held his breath as the black chest opened slowly. A sharp creak that hurt his ears could be heard. Creak. The chest fell as a slender brown arm extended out of the chest. It was about the length of a child's finger. 2 arms pressed forward one after another as an object about the size a normal human being's palm appeared bit by bit in front of Klein and company. It had clear elbow, finger and knee joints. Covered in an oil-stained brown cloth, its face was painted with the colors of a clown, red and yellow. It was a wooden puppet with a weird appearance. 2-049 lifted its head and looked at Klein with its pure black eyes. Its rigid mouth slowly parted to reveal a clown-like smile. The wooden puppet's face was painted in red and yellow like the common clown. The corners of its mouth were upturned high, revealing an abnormally comical smile. Its lips parted to reveal a dark and deep mouth. Klein, who had locked his gaze with it, felt his hair stand as intense horror leaped out of his heart in an uncontrollable manner. Everything before his eyes grew dull, as though he was looking at the world through a piece of thick brown glass. Klein's thoughts slowed down gradually and he instinctively wanted to ask for help, but his neck seemed to be held tight by a rope. He couldn't make a single sound and the single word was trapped in silence. Just then, Dunn noticed his arm exercises becoming sluggish and pushed him heavily. The brown glass before Klein's eyes shattered in an instant. He blurted out the word help, which had remained dormant in his throat. It reverberated within the carriage with sharp panic. It's getting stronger, Klein spoke in a very certain tone. Being next to a strange sealed artifact like 2-049 really placed on in terrifying peril if they were not careful. No, it was totally impossible to guard against it. It could only be avoided through other methods. It's normal, Ayer Harson said steadily, nodding. Lorata chuckled. It seems to like you? Don't worry. It is a relatively less dangerous grade 2 sealed artifact. In her naturally languid voice, the puppet whose joints clearly reflected a human stood up. It began tottering towards its left. Its action was incomprehensible, just like a steam engine that someone had rusted due to a lack of lubricating oil. Robot dance. Klein suddenly had the few Chinese words pop into his head. He had a new guess of the danger 2-049 posed. It assimilates the living things that it seizes control of. If I am not woken up in time by the others, would I have become a human-sized puppet, a real-life Barbie doll? Just as thoughts flooded Klein, Ayer Harson was awoken by Dunn. He extended and bent his arms as he pointed in the direction that the puppet was walking slowly towards. He said to Leonard, who was driving the carriage, "Over there." Leonard couldn't make the carriage pass through the building, so he had to detour. During the detour, 2-049 constantly adjusted the direction that it was facing. It acted like a compass that pointed towards the Antigonus family. Upon seeing the scene, Klein, who was constantly exercising his arms, nearly burst out laughing under the tension. I heard that 2-049 was created by the Antigonus family. Is this an act of loyalty or the perfect example of screwing things up? Leonard drove the carriage according to Ayer Harson's occasional instructions. Whenever the strange puppet 2-049 walked to the edge of the carriage, Ayer Harson would pull it back and start it all over again. Every time that happened, its mouth would open and two people would be under its influence simultaneously. Klein's taut feelings gradually began to relax. He realized that sealed artifact 2-049 was not as scary anymore. As long as there were more than 3 people present and they constantly maintained their arm motions, if they made sure to wake their partners in time, 2-049 was merely a puppet with slightly unique characteristics. The carriage traveled at high speed and quickly arrived at the harbor where warehouses were clustered. After circling a few times, they confirmed that 2-049 intended to enter the innermost grayish-white warehouse. Ayer Harson's expression turned solemn. He grabbed the puppet carefully and stuffed it back into the black chest. Thump, thump, thump. Under constant ferocious knocking, Ayer woke up again and again with the help of Borja and Larata as he activated the mechanism with great effort. He then injected his spirituality and activated the star and crimson symbols on the chest. At the reappearance of the formless seal, Ayer Harson let out a long heavy breath. "Let's get down," Dunsmith said with a low and mild voice. "Leonard, tying the horse here will do." Dressed in windbreakers, suits, or shirts, the 6 left the carriage and walked into the innermost warehouse. As they walked, they uniformly stretched and bent their arms. This added a comical and ridiculous vibe to the rather tense situation. The Nighthawk Awkward Dance Squad. Klein could only complain inwardly to ease such a feeling. However, there was no other way around it. According to his observations, 2-049 first affected the upper body. Therefore, to detect it in time to prevent a more dangerous situation from developing, they only had the choice of extending and bending their arms, shake their necks or bodies. However, the latter only made one look like a hooligan. As for actions like blinking eyes and striking one's eyebrows, they were either too easily ignored or the action was too big. Neither was a good option. This awkward dance squad is better than Causeway Bay 1 Triad members. Klein sighed in resignation and followed Captain Dunsmith and company. As they approached the warehouse's door, the deeper his anxiety and worry became. No one knew what kind of effect the notebook had on Ray Bieber. If something dire happened, Klein did not dare pin his hopes on transmigrating again. Furthermore, he discovered that he could still be injured and bleed while chopping ingredients for dinner. The speed at which he recovered at was normal too. He wasn't some kind of monster that was impervious to combat or death. As they walked, Dunn suddenly lowered his non-moving hand and made a pressing gesture to beckon everyone to stop 10 meters away from the warehouse's door. "Klein, divine if there is any danger in the warehouse. It'd be better if you could tell the level of danger," Dunn said as he turned his head to Klein. His gray eyes looked deep as usual. There was no fear. Klein gave an unnoticeable nod and stopped the hand exercise. He extended his right hand to his left cuff and removed the silver chain that had a hanging piece of topaz. As he was still moving his arms, Dunn realized his sluggish actions in time and woke him up with a nudge. Klein held the silver chain with his left hand and allowed the topaz to hang down naturally. Simultaneously, he moved his right arm but with a much smaller range of motion. When the topaz stabilized, he half closed his eyes, outlined the spherical light and entered cogitation. He then mumbled, "There's danger in the warehouse. There's danger in the warehouse." After 7 times, he opened his eyes and saw the hanging topaz slowly going in clockwise circles. It turned faster and faster, and in the end Klein felt like it was pulling his left hand. "There's danger, great danger," Klein replied honestly. Clockwise meant affirmation to the chanted statement, while counterclockwise meant denial. To other Beyonders, even a mystery prior, using spirit dowsing could only determine if there was danger, but it was unable to obtain information regarding the level of danger. However, Klein discovered that when he used spirit dowsing, the pendulum would spin at different speeds, revealing the degree of the answer. Although it was not very accurate and extremely vague, it allowed one to have a rough assessment of the actual situation. As expected of a seer potion, Klein was rather happy with the outcome. Just as he was about to put away the topaz pendulum, Leonard Mitchell, who had maintained his silence, suddenly spoke. "Divine if there is danger around us also." Dunn nodded in agreement. Yes, I am worried that the secret order will not give up and that it has placed Ray Bieber's house under constant surveillance. They could have followed us here and could cause trouble at a critical moment. Klein took a deep breath and entered a calm, ethereal state once again. When the silver chain turned stable once again, he recited in his heart, "There is danger surrounding us. There is danger surrounding us." After repeating the statement, Klein opened his eyes and looked at the silver chain. In his dark brown eyes, the topaz pendulum first moved counterclockwise with difficulty. Then it suddenly paused and started moving clockwise. "There is danger surrounding us." Klein felt a tug on his heartstrings as he spoke carefully. Furthermore, someone had tried to intercept his divination, but had lost to him in the invisible fight. Just as he spoke, an orange-yellow fireball the size of a fist flew towards them. It came crashing towards the middle of the group with its blazing speed. Dunn Smith, who had already drawn his long-barreled revolver before Klein did his divination, immediately raised his hand, aimed and pulled the trigger. Bang! The fireball didn't seem to be affected by the gunshot but continued its original trajectory, as though it was forcing everyone to scatter from dodging. Klein originally thought nothing of the troublemaker who was following them. After all, there were 6 Beyonders present. They were not even short of Sequence 8 and Sequence 7 experts. It was a lineup that was practically unstoppable in a small city like Tianjin. But when the fireball smashed down, he came to a sudden realization. To them, the most dangerous enemy was not the tracker nor the troublemaker. It wasn't even Ray Bieber who was in the warehouse in an unknown state, but the sealed artifact 2-049. Once they dispersed and the battle began, they wouldn't be able to wake each other in time. Then they would turn into real-life puppets one after another. As these chaotic thoughts bombarded him, Klein was pulled by Leonard aside to dodge the fireball. Without the time to feel anguish for his clothing, he saw the Nighthawks split off into 2 groups while dodging. It was done very orderly. Poof! The orange-yellow fireball landed on the ground but didn't stir one bit of dust. It disappeared as though nothing had happened. An illusion? Just as this thought came to him, Klein saw Iyer Harson lift the black chest and threw at least 10 meters away. "Stay away from it. Watch it!" Iyer shouted. Before he finished his shout, Leonard and Borja had separately approached it. They stood at least 7 meters from the chest to prevent anyone from approaching. As for Dunn and Lorata, they each held guns. They stood beside Iyer Harson, who had drawn a thin silver sword. They took up a formation resembling a crescent as they rushed towards the origins of the fireball, while taking note of the peripheral regions. Upon seeing this scene, Klein, who needed to do the arm exercises without his cane, immediately heaved a sigh of relief. He realized he had overlooked an important matter. 2-049 had a limited range of influence. As long as they were at a sufficient distance from it, they did not need to worry about the danger. Klein rolled over and stood up. He stuffed his topaz pendulum into his pocket with one hand while he reached into his holster for his revolver with the other. Under the illumination of the afternoon sun, Klein, in his dust-coated clothes, quickly twisted his revolver's barrel to remove his self-imposed safety. He went into a shooting stance, allowing the light to reflect from the bronze body of the revolver. He held the revolver with one hand and moved his other arm, cautiously paying attention to anything that could happen around him. At the same time, he was a little worried for Captain Dunn and Mr. Iyer Harson. After all, both were Nightmare Beyonders who specialized in influencing the enemy from the shadows. He did not know if they were adept at direct combat. Just as Klein was having these considerations, Iyer Harson slowed down, his expression becoming serene and peaceful. He opened his mouth and recited a peaceful poem, one that seemed to place a person into the night. When once the sun sinks in the west, and dewdrops pearl the evening's breast, almost as pale as moonbeams are, or its companionable star, the evening primrose opens anew, its delicate blossoms to the dew, and, hermit-like shunning the light one. The recital reverberated around them. Klein nearly lost his tense feelings and completely relaxed. He was lucky that he had experienced something similar before and was not facing Iyer Harson. Thus, he quickly collected himself and entered a half-cogitative state to combat the influence of the poem. Phew! He let out a sigh of relief. He no longer had any doubts about Dunn's and Ayer's direct combat abilities. As he had only advanced recently and still did not have a deep understanding of sequence potions, Klein had forgotten that the Sequence 7 Nightmare was the advancement of Sequence 8 Midnight Poet. They could keep whatever abilities they had before and, in fact, enjoy a small increase in their abilities. The impression Klein had of Midnight Poets all came from Leonard Mitchell. He knew that this job inherited the unique traits of a Sleepless. They were good at combat, shooting, climbing, and sensing. They were also adept in influencing the living creatures around them through the use of various poems. In simpler terms, they were violent poets. While Ayer was reciting his poem, the large wooden crates stacked up around them seemed to suddenly ripple like water. A man wearing a black tuxedo and half-top hat appeared. But this man's face was painted in 3 pastel colors: red, yellow, and white. The sides of his lips were arched high like a clown, forming a ridiculous contrast with his formal wear that was suitable for joining an evening banquet. Thud. The black-haired Lorata, who had been introduced as a sharpshooter, charged forward quickly. She had a gun in one hand and had clenched the other into a fist. She made it within inches of the suited clown in a few steps. The suited clown seemed to be affected by Ayer Harson's poem. His body was swaying and he had a peaceful expression in his eyes. He did not have any desire to retaliate. Lorata tilted her body with a boxing maneuver as she pulled back her fist, then punched toward the suited clown's face. Bang! The air crackled as the suited clown shattered suddenly like a mirror, pieces quickly evaporating and vanishing into thin air. At this moment, the suited clown quickly appeared once again in the shadows of the wooden crates a few steps away. The suited clown's figure outline quickly appeared again. The person under the influence of the poem was only an illusion. It was a performance. The suited clown grinned again. It had a comical look as he pressed down on his half-top hat with one hand and pointed a finger gun with the other. Bang! The sound of a shot rang from the finger gun. Lorata fell to the left and rolled on the floor, dodging the attack. But nothing had happened except for the fake gunshot. Bang! 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 Dunn and Ayer each lifted their guns and fired steadily. The suited clown dodged adeptly, sometimes to the right and left, sometimes rolling on the ground. It was as if he was an acrobat act in a circus. Suddenly, Lorata surprisingly charged forward again. Despite being called a sharpshooter, she was still using her fists. Bam! The suited clown could not dodge the attack in time and could only lift his left arm to block the fist. Seeing the clown stop, Dunn and Ayer did not hesitate to each take aim and pulled the trigger. At this moment, the arm that the suited clown used to block Lorata's fist ignited with an orange-yellow flame. In an instant, the flame enveloped the suited clown and spread towards Lorata. Bang! Bang! Dunn and Ayer fired their revolvers, hitting the ball of flame. The flames burned rapidly and soon, all that was left were black ashes floating in the sky. But the suited clown once again appeared behind the stack of wooden crates close by. He lifted his right hand and pointed a finger gun once again. Bang! Amid the illusory gunshot, Lorata suddenly stopped in her tracks. She did not charge forward. Mud was splattering in front of her as a bullet appeared. The suited clown was no longer delivering an illusion with this strike. It was hard to discern real from fake, reality from illusion. Bang! 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 The suited clown shot at Dunn and Ayer repeatedly while hiding away and appearing at random times. Upon seeing this, Lorata squinted and lifted the dull gold revolver in her left hand. Bang! The suited clown suddenly squatted down, avoiding the fatal shot. His half-top hat was sent flying backward, falling to the ground. The bullet had left a visible scorch mark on the hat. After rolling a few times on the floor, the suited clown scaled the stacks of wooden crates with the agility of a monkey. He shot air bullets out of his finger gun from the high ground. Ayer Hansen took a few steps back and lowered his gun. He began his recital once again. Wastes its fair bloom upon the night. Who, blindfold to its fond caresses, knows not the beauty it possesses. The suited clown jumped repeatedly between the crates. He suddenly raised his hand to scratch his ears and looked at Ayer with a comical smile. Could he have stuffed his ears? The sequence potion that the secret order possesses sure is weird. Klein observed the fight from far away as he made silent guesses. Just as his thoughts flashed through him, he suddenly saw a figure appear at the top of a warehouse beside him. Furthermore, it was running straight inside where Ray Bieber was hiding. That figure was dressed in a grayish-white uniform, one which workers at the docks wore. His face also appeared to be painted red, yellow, and white. The suited clown is responsible for distracting Captain and the rest while the other person retrieved the diary? Klein instinctively raised his right hand and shot at the figure on the roof. He had just taken aim when the figure suddenly squatted, switching from running to rolling on the ground. Bang! Klein did not stop pulling the trigger. He saw the figure suddenly pause, blood blooming in a spurt. The figure looked at him in shock. While bearing the pain, he continued charging into the warehouse. That felt like a lucky shot. Klein twitched his lips and pulled the trigger once again. This time the bullet hit the wooden roof beside the figure. Bang! 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 Leonard and Borja also shot but did not hit the figure. Klein wanted to criticize how terrible their shooting skills were as compared to his when he suddenly stopped pulling the trigger. That's right. Why must we stop him? Didn't I divine that there is grave danger in the warehouse just now? Wouldn't it be great if we let that guy be the vanguard and step on the landmine for us? Leonard and that Mr. Borja must have had the same idea. With this thought, Klein lifted the barrel of his revolver and shot at the sky. Bang! 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 As the gunshots rang, the figure managed to reach the innermost region of the warehouse unobstructed. He lunged downwards, slamming into the roof as he fell down with the collapsing roof. Immediately following the commotion, the black-haired Lorata's eyes suddenly turned black. Her left hand began making a strange pulling action. The suited clown's jumping actions suddenly came to a pause as his ankle seemed to be grasped tightly by an invisible hand. Dunn did not shoot immediately and instead pointed his revolver downward. He opened his mouth and by simply using his spirituality to resonate the air around him, he produced a strange, faint and ethereal voice without the use of his throat. Thus it blooms on while night is by. When day looks out with open eye, bashed at the gaze it cannot shun, it faints and withers and is gone. The suited clown suddenly became limp as if he had lost the desire to live. Iyer Harson lifted his handgun and took aim, his finger pulling the trigger immediately. In that split second, there was an abnormal and tragic wail that came from the warehouse. Ah! The cry contained immense fear as though he had encountered an unimaginably terrifying matter. The hair on Klein's body stood on end. The tragic cries came to a sudden stop as silence was restored in the deepest parts of the warehouse. It was a skin-crawling silence. Bang! Affected by the cry, Iyer only managed to shoot the suited clown in the belly. Phi! 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 The silence was once again broken from the deepest depths of the warehouse. What should have been soft panting sounded. It reached a crescendo that tightened everyone's nerves. Thump! 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 Inside the black chest 2-049 had reached a frenzied state. Ha! 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 Thump! 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 The loud panting and the intense knocking alternated first before they resounded together. It made Klein and company extremely nervous, as though they were hearing some evil murmur. Taking advantage of the moment Iyer, Dunn and Lorata had their attention redirected, the suited clown suddenly pulled out a long piece of paper from his pocket. Pop! He threw it with his right hand as the slip of paper ignited into a black fiery whip. Then he lashed it towards the side of his ankle. A fleeting but tragic scream sounded as the suited clown escaped the invisible shackles and did a backflip. Bang! 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 Dunn, Iyer and Lorata shot but their bullets only ended up hitting the wooden crates. The suited clown did not stay any longer as he pressed down on his wound with his right hand while escaping in a direction opposite the warehouse. He was so fast that in the blink of an eye, all that was left was a hint of his back. And before he vanished, his right hand which pressed down on his abdomen moved towards his left arm. The wound on his stomach had already vanished, looking completely fine. The location on his left arm which he touched with his right hand suddenly became badly mangled, and a silver bullet appeared in the torn flesh. Dunn and the rest didn't chase after him because the panting from the innermost warehouse was so loud that it was making them nervous and insecure. Bang! The door of the innermost warehouse suddenly exploded and flew in all directions. Then something wrapped with a torn cloth flew out and landed not far from Klein. When Klein cast his gaze over, he realized that it was an arm. Its bloody flesh had been chewed on and its white bones were cracked in an irregular fashion as they jutted out paw. One item after another flew out. First it was a spray of blood, followed by a dilated eye and an ear which had been ripped out brutally. Finally, half a beating heart and intestines filled with yellowish-brown objects came out. If Klein had not seen the more gruesome giant cadaver at Ray Bieber's place, he would have probably vomited there and then. His nerves were on the brink of a breakdown. After a great deal of effort to hold back his urge to shoot into the pitch-black entrance, he ejected the empty shells from his revolver and reloaded with new demon-hunting bullets. Bang! Dunn drew close as he stably shot into the warehouse. However, his bullet was like a shot into the sea. There was no audible response. Ha! 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 The loud panting sped up as grayish-white colors filled the open door. With another 2 loud shots, Iyer Harson's and Borja's bullets tore through the whiteness, but failed to prevent the color from spilling outwards. It did not leave any wounds or cause liquid to seep out. Klein held his breath and kept himself from shooting blindly. He watched as the whiteness slowly revealed a complete outline. It was a humanoid creature more than 2 meters tall. His limb joints were all unnaturally twisted. It was as though they had been snapped by someone forcefully. White bones poked out from under its skin as the entire grayish-white surface was filled with gullies, like a human brain that had been stripped from its shell. The monster had grayish-white, rotting, sticky liquid flowing all over it. Its head looked relatively normal with deep wrinkles and pale skin. As it opened and closed its mouth, Klein could see a porcelain false tooth that looked close to falling out, a few strands of bloody saliva and bone and flesh that had been minced. Was Ray Bieber still even King human? Klein drew a silent gasp as he felt his heart pound rapidly. Bang! Leonard's demon-hunting bullet hit Ray Bieber's forehead and tore right through it, leaving behind a deep hole. Grayish-white liquid flowed out and dripped onto the ground. The liquid wriggled and turned into fat cream-colored maggots. But the monster appeared completely unaffected. It was neither fast nor slow when it pounced at Borja, who was closest to it. Its actual target appeared to be the black chest that contained sealed artifact 2-049. Loss of control of Beyonder powers. Dunn shouted in a deep voice. Lorata, it looks like a dead soul, so quickly look for its weakness. All right. Lorata did not speak further as she raised her hands to press down on her eyes. Her pupils turned gray then colorless, as though she had entered the world of spirits and a kingdom of dead souls. She looked down at the enemy from a higher vantage point as she searched for a node. Klein saw that a normal gunshot was ineffective, so he did not bother wasting more of his bullets. He lifted his hand to tap at his glabella to activate his spirit vision. He planned on helping gravedigger Lorata. From his vision, Monster Bieber only had one kind of spiritual glow left. It was purely grayish-white, a whiteness filled with craziness. Apart from that, Klein saw nothing else. At that moment, Iyer Harson and Leonard Mitchell sang simultaneously. Oh, the threat of horror, the hope of crimson cries. One thing at least is certain, that this life flies. One thing is certain and the rest is lies. The flower that once has bloomed forever dies. The power that allowed one to enter a peaceful slumber emanated. The twisted grayish-white monster gradually slowed down as though it could not fight against the charm of the poem. Then it opened its mouth and let out a shrill cry that ordinary people were deaf to. Ah! Bang! Klein felt a sharp pain in his head as he automatically exited his spirit vision state. He felt warm liquid flowing out of his nose, and when he subconsciously wiped it with his hand, he discovered the back of his hand covered in blood. Iyer and Leonard fell back to the ground at the same time. They had blood stains lining the corners of their lips, noses and eyes. Borja, Dunn and Lorata each took a step or two back, the color in their face draining. That monster only screamed once, but it appeared to exceed what the 6 Beyonders could withstand. They instantly turned extremely weak. Bam! It closed in on Borja and suddenly swung its twisted joint. Bang! 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 Borja and Dunn shot twice each, but they didn't cause any damage to Monster Bieber. Bang! A blow sent Borja flying out as his long-barreled revolver fell to the ground. He tried to stand up a few times but failed to do so. The corner of Monster Bieber's mouth had stringy liquid oozing out as it leaped towards the black chest. Bang! At that crucial moment, Iyer Harson shot a bullet at the box to knock it some distance away, preventing Monster Bieber from grabbing it. Its momentum brought it forward by more than 10 meters. The black chest cracked, and as the thumping within turned more intense, it grew more obvious. Found it. The black-haired Lorata finally spoke. I need you to control it for at least 3 seconds. All right. Dunn didn't delay any further. He extended his hand to tap his glabella and closed his eyes. He seemed to fall asleep as shapeless waves slowly rippled out one after another. In that instant, Monster Bieber paused and the craziness in its eyes quickly receded. Its thin, transparent eyelids began to close uncontrollably as well. Dunn's body started quivering and something popped up under his clothing and wriggled on the spot. It was as though he hid slippery, scaleless snakes within. Lorata rushed over and with a roll arrived under Monster Bieber. She supported herself with one hand while raising a clenched fist, bombarding Monster Bieber's crotch like artillery. Poof! She ignored the corrosive pain but supported herself against the ground and directed more strength once again. She went higher a little as her fist drilled deeper in. Rip! Lorata pulled out her forearm as she dragged out an intestine filled with brownish-yellow blood stains. In the intestine there was an ancient notebook. Ah! Monster Bieber let out a blood-curdling scream, and his body suddenly lit up as though it was melting. Get down! Just as Iyer Harson's hurried shout ended, Klein saw Monster Bieber suddenly swell up. Boom! Amid a loud explosion, the distant Klein was tossed into the air by the shockwave and landed heavily. He struggled to stand against a swirling headache and he saw Monster Bieber turn into a pile of disgusting rotting flesh. Then he saw Dunn and Lorata, who were a dozen meters away, looking like they had been knocked out. Iyer Harson, Borja and Leonard Mitchell were on the ground too. Some groaning in pain, some struggling to stand up but failing. Klein was just about to relax when he suddenly saw a familiar object about 2 or 3 meters away from him. The black chest had stopped rolling and cracked surface was facing the sky. A skinny brown arm extended out. Sealed artifact. 2-049, F***K. Klein's heart tensed up as he immediately leaped in the opposite direction in a bid to escape 2-049's effective range. The blast from before had thrown the black chest near him. And at that moment, Klein's head suddenly buzzed as his thoughts turned sluggish. Oh no. I've been controlled by the puppet. Captain and company are either unconscious or have yet to recover. They can't even get up. They will not be able to wake me up in time. No. I have to save myself. Everything before Klein's eyes was happening in slow motion. All his joints and his brain seemed to have been coated with an ever-thickening layer of glue. He had no interest in becoming a human version puppet, so he seized the opportunity of not being fully controlled by trying his best to seek a way to save himself. I definitely can't hit myself. There must be an external force. External force. I'll give it a try. There's no time for hesitation. Without the luxury of time to think through things, Klein came to an idea in less than 3 seconds. He moved his rusty knee joint and took a counterclockwise step. At the same time, he did not try to escape the invisible rope that hung around his throat. All he did was recite inwardly. Blessings stem from the immortal Lord of heaven and earth. He wanted to use the mysterious world above the gray fog to awaken him and escape sealed artifact 2-049's assimilation. Creak, creak, creak. Klein's knees and ankles let out an involved ear-piercing sound. With a slow contorted step he took another step counterclockwise. Blessings stem from the Sky Lord of heaven and earth. Klein's thoughts turned increasingly sluggish as he felt as though he was a computer that had all sorts of bloatware and every antivirus software installed. He lifted his left foot in a jerky manner as he took another step in the required spot. Blessings stem from the exalted the arch. Klein's thought processes turned more and more rigid and sluggish. He took the final step purely out of instinct. At that point he knew he was almost fully under the puppet's control. Even if Iyer Harson could get up in time to save him, he would probably be unable to be awakened. But his strong desire to live made him chant the final line of the incantation. Blessings from the celestial, worthy Just as he finished his incantation, the extremely chaotic and hysterical shouts and murmurs sounded. They quickly took over every corner of Klein's sluggish thoughts, shattering them in the process and reducing them to thoughts he had no control over. Klein's brain became a boiling pot of potpourri as his stiff body turned light while his spirituality lifted. Endless grayish-white fog and the dark red stars of varying distances appeared once again before his eyes. It was vast, mysterious, vague and blurry. Klein's confused mind quickly settled down as he finally regained his ability to think, only to see the magnificent palace. Phew. Thankfully it worked. He whispered with a lingering fear. According to his previous observations, he knew that once someone fell under the control of sealed artifact 2-049, it was equivalent to death. Normally, there was no medicine that could save the victim. Luckily, his luck enhancement ritual and the mysterious world above the gray fog was not considered normal at all. After pacing a few times, Klein began considering the situation he was in. I can't just stay here the entire time, right? By the time Captain and company wakes up and gather over, I won't be able to explain the situation. As things are right now, I only have the shell of my body, nothing more zombie-like than a zombie. But if I were to take the risk and return, there's no way to guarantee my safety. What if I get controlled by 2-049 again? While suffering from his dilemma, Klein suddenly smacked himself in the forehead and could not help but chuckle softly. It looks like I haven't gotten used to my status as a seer. Before he finished his sentence, he appeared at the seat of honor in front of the long bronze table, sitting on the high-back chair with the strange symbol. Klein extended his hand as a fountain pen appeared out of thin air. He scribbled a sentence on an illusory piece of paper. Returning to the real world is very safe. Immediately following that, Klein pulled out a projection of a spirit pendulum from his packet. After a few gatherings, he discovered that the items he brought on him were projected above the gray fog, but they were relatively illusory. Klein held the silver chain with his left hand as he allowed the topaz to nearly touch the paper. He calmed his breathing and half-closed his eyes. He calmly repeated the words on the piece of paper. Returning to the real world is very safe. Returning to the real world is very safe. After repeating it 7 times, Klein completed the divination with spirit dowsing. He opened his eyes and saw the topaz slowly oscillating, guiding the silver chain in a clockwise spin. Clockwise is an affirmation while counterclockwise is negative. Returning to the real world is very safe. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he habitually stored the chain away. Then he released his spirituality and wrapped his body as he simulated a plummeting state. The hazy fog and deep red stars turned ethereal and charged upward. Klein soon saw himself still in a daze in his original position. He saw the brown puppet halfway out of the chest. He also noticed that the sealed artifact had apparently stopped all motion. His physical senses reached to his brain, and just as he was about to try to move his arm to determine his condition, he suddenly heard a voice concealed within the wind. Do you wish to be awakened? You can be saved as long as you promise me one thing. This one thing is to help me take that Antigonus family notebook. Not if you agree. I know you are still capable of completing that action. Who is it? Yes. 2-049 doesn't seem like it's attempting to control me. That's right. It will not repeatedly influence the same person. There will be a break. Klein was shocked, but he did not show it on his face. At that moment, the voice added quickly, "You can obtain additional rewards if you complete this matter. I know you are a seer. I also know that the Church of the Evernight Goddess does not have sequence 8 that succeeds sequence 9. But our secret order can give it to you. To be honest, I was a seer before. If not, I wouldn't have dared return. To show you my sincerity, I can now tell you that the corresponding sequence 8 of seer is clown. Clown? Secret order." Klein nearly did not maintain his puppet state. He never made the connection between seer and clown. Were they about to become the head honchos of a circus? All right, make your choice. Believe me, you no longer have much time left to waste. The voice sounded with the wind again. The distant Dunn and Lorata were still unconscious. Borja seemed heavily injured as he moaned without moving. Ire Harson and Leonard Mitchell were in relatively good shape as they attempted to sit up. Why me? The secret order. Is it that suited clown from before? After he escaped, he secretly returned in a bid to fish in troubled waters. Upon hearing the voice, all sorts of doubts instantly flashed through Klein's mind. Since the person said that he was a seer, Klein attempted using the thought processes of a seer to analyze the situation. He dared return because he divined hope. He believed that Monster Bieber would be destroyed and that we would suffer a heavy setback. He did not take the notebook by himself or deal with us directly because he likely divined that it would contain immense risk. Therefore he is suspecting Captain and Madame Lorata are feigning their unconsciousness, or that this is a trap laid out for him. He did not make further divinations to determine my present state partially because firstly he might not have the time. If he waited any longer, Mr. Eyre Harson and company would have regained some of their combat strength. Secondly, he belittles me and thinks it unnecessary. He understands a seer very well and is confident that I'm unable to escape the puppet's control. He is using me as cannon fodder to probe for any traps. From another angle, this also means that the luck enhancement ritual does not cause any abnormal appearances. With his brain no longer sluggish, Klein felt that his line of reasoning was clear. He was quite confident of the thoughts and goals of the suited clown. As for the clown's promise, he believed not one bit of it. Cannon fodder did not have any human rights. As the thoughts flashed through his head, Klein controlled his neck and difficulty nodded. As he did this action, he confirmed that he had escaped the control of sealed artifact 2-049. Just after he nodded, a transparent curtain stirred 2 to 3 meters to his side. It revealed the suited clown who had his face painted with a clown's pastel colors. It was none other than the Secret Order member who had fled previously. At that moment, as Klein had previously turned around in an attempt to leap out of 2-049's effective range, his back was facing the black chest and the puppet. The suited clown was in front of him to his side. First, it was to stay away from the sealed artifact, and second, to avoid his revolver's barrel. It was clear that he was very careful. The suited clown pulled out a long paper slip from his pocket and shook it vigorously until it turned straight like a wooden pole. He held the wooden pole and at a distance of 2 to 3 meters, he gave Klein's shoulder a prod in an attempt to wake him. This fellow knows 2-049 very well. He knows that if the scent of an Antigonus family descendant is present, the puppet would go ballistic and control 2 at a time. He also knows that throwing a rock doesn't seem effective. At the very least, I've seen Captain and company attempt similar means. Although Klein did not know why 2-049 had stopped assimilating him again, he did not dare stay within 5 meters of it any longer. Therefore he waited as he held his breath. Just as the wooden pole was about to touch his shoulder, Klein suddenly raised his left hand and grabbed the edge of the pole and yanked it backwards. The suited clown was caught by surprise as his body was pulled forward. He staggered a few steps forward as the gap between him and Klein contracted once again. He was now less than 2 meters away. At the same time, the prepared Klein squeezed his right finger on the revolver's trigger. Bang! Bang! He shot twice but did not aim at the suited clown. Instead, he had aimed behind him, shooting to the side of sealed artifact 2-049. Before the gunshot rang, the suited clown had taken the initiative to roll from his staggering state. He had instinctively backed off. Klein released his hand which had grabbed the wooden pole as he took several steps away rapidly and rushed out the danger zone. Just as the suited clown rolled twice and was about to jump backwards, his head went abuzz as his thoughts rapidly turned sluggish. Oh good. He forced me to dodge in the direction of the Antigonus puppet. I'm within 5 meters. How could he not be controlled by the Antigonus puppet? The suited clown stopped from his rolling as he attempted to crawl out with his seemingly rusty joints. At that moment, Klein had already turned around. He held his revolver with both hands as he aimed at the slowly moving target. To him, that was equivalent to shooting a fixed target. Having seen the suited clown's battle with Dunn, Eyre and Lorata, Klein knew that he was agile and good at rolling. Therefore, even when they were just a meter or two apart, he had carefully given up on shooting directly. Instead, he forced the clown to dodge to the kill zone he imagined, where sealed artifact 2-049 was. If the puppet had been ineffective, the suited clown would have determined that he had fallen into a trap. He would then escape by leaping backwards and not pose any significant threat. Bang! Reflected into the indescribable eyes of the suited clown, The black-suited Klein pulled the trigger calmly. Bang! The silver bullet traversed the short distance of a few meters and accurately bore into the suited clown's neck. Large amounts of blood spewed out, dyeing his skin and bow tie red. The suited clown was unable to let out a cry as his throat seemed to produce sounds of him gasping for breath. He wished to raise his arm to divert the fatal wound, but his joints appeared to be filled with glue. His motions were slow and jerky. Bang! Having entered a half-cogitation state, Klein was not stunned by the appearance of blood. He pulled the trigger once again calmly as though it was his usual daily practice. A grisly hole appeared on the suited clown's forehead as crimson red spewed out. The luster in his eyes dimmed as the intricate revolver's might was far higher than what Klein had imagined to be. As his knees buckled and his arms hung down, the suited clown gradually fell to the ground. His eyes were frozen with a dazed look. His body convulsed a few times before it slowly relaxed and stopped moving. Having delivered a headshot, Klein turned around in a cool manner. He spun his revolver and allowed the empty shells to fall down. Then, dressed in his black formal suit and half-top hat, he walked towards Iyer Harson. He pulled out the final silver demon hunting bullet in his pocket and inserted it into the revolver's chamber. The reason why he did not turn back to look at the suited clown's tragic fate was solely because of his discomfort with his first kill. However, it was necessary. He did not know what would happen if the suited clown was under the full control of the puppet. Furthermore, he did not dare risk entering sealed artifact 2-049's effective range. After all, no one knew if something odd would happen that prevented his self-rescuing luck enhancement ritual to fail. As for the items on the suited clown, Klein only cared if there was the so-called clown potion formula or the relevant clues. However, this was not something he was in a hurry to carry out. In a while he could do it together with Dunn, Iyer and company. If the Nighthawks had it, it also practically meant that he had it. There was no way that they would be unwilling to share the potion formula of Sequence 8. At most, he would be required to accumulate his contributions over time. After all, he had only become a seer recently. It would still be a long time until he fully digested it. As his thoughts churned, Klein quickly walked next to Iyer Harson. The gentleman in his gray windbreaker struggled to sit up but failed at every try. He was covered in dust and mud from the fall. "Mr. Harson, what do you need me to do?" he asked, squatting down. He pointed the revolver in his hand at the ground in case of a misfire. Iyer gasped for air and sighed. The monster was too strong, if not for its weakness. Then he pointed at a sky-blue metal bottle beside him and said in a self-deprecating laugh, "I was trying to consume some medicine but my hand shook." The sky-blue bottle was about the size of Klein's finger. It was not longer than 5 centimeters long and a cap that hid spiral patterns had fallen to the side. The liquid had completely spilled. Klein reached out to pick up the bottle. As he looked at it with narrowed eyes, he answered helplessly, "Mr. Harson, there are only a few drops left in the bottle. Go to Borgia and search his body. In his inner pockets." Iyer said as he gasped for breath. "All right." Klein stood up and casually asked, "Is this restorative medicine? An item from mysticism?" "No, it only has certain restorative effects. The main goal is to stimulate our minds and squeeze out the potential of our bodies. It allows to maintain a decent state for a short period of time until we return where we can receive treatment." Iyer attempted to sit up only to fail again. "Its name is the Goddess's Gaze. Remember to let Borgia drink half a bottle." Klein did not delay any further as he turned around. He briskly arrived at Borgia, who was groaning in pain. He found the uniform's sky-blue metal bottle from the Nighthawk's pocket. After removing the cap, he carefully held the bottle to Borgia's mouth. Having sensed it, Borgia tried hard to open his lips. The bottle was held up as dark red liquid flowed in Borgia's mouth. Klein estimated the quantity and stopped just in time. He then screwed the cap back on. The medicine was rather effective. It only took Borgia a few seconds after drinking to regain the spirit in his eyes. Furthermore, he whispered, "Thank you." With that said, he pressed down on the ground as he slowly sat up. He first dealt with his wounds before walking to the unconscious Lorata and Dunn. Then he retrieved the goddess's gaze from the latter's inner pocket. Klein returned to Ayer's side and fed him the remaining half-bottle. After Ayer panted a few times, his actions suddenly became nimbler. He stood up as though he had never been injured. "I'll help Borgia. Help that partner of yours." The gentleman with the charm of a middle-aged man pointed at Leonard Mitchell. Klein had no objections to it. He turned around and jogged to the poet. "Leonard. There's no need. I can drink it by myself." Leonard, with his disheveled hair, smiled as he raised the sky-blue bottle. Upon seeing Leonard agilely get up by pushing up with one hand, Klein, who wanted to lampoon, was suddenly stunned. "Leonard's injuries are lighter than I expected. He had the ability to consume the medicine from the very beginning. That also means that he could see me walk counterclockwise as I did the luck enhancement ritual. No, that's still all right." I had chanted inwardly, and the luck enhancement ritual does not appear odd in any way, or the suited clown would not have fallen for it. But even so, Leonard, who had long recovered but chose to watch by the sidelines, had seen quite a lot. Things like me not being affected by 2-049 and my sneak attack on the suited clown. Just as Klein's eyes narrowed slightly, Leonard, who was walking in his direction, stopped beside him and chuckled softly. "I actually wanted to save you but discovered that you didn't need it. Don't mind it. There are many special people in this world that can always do things others can't, such as you. And me." Leonard smiled as he went past Klein and walked to the awakening Dunn and Lorata. Narcissist. Klein thought silently as he felt a lot more relaxed. From the looks of it, Leonard Mitchell hid quite a bit of secrets. As he regrouped with the rest while deep in thought, he saw Captain Dunn wear a cloth and pick up the Antigonus family notebook that was covered in yellowish-brown blood stains. The notebook's cover was completely made of thick black paper. It suffused an aura from an ancient and distant time without any signs of softening or rotting. It was nearly identical to the one he saw in his dream. He even suspected that flipping it open would only make him see the fool wearing splendid headgear. However, he soon realized that he was overthinking things since Dunn had flipped open the notebook to make a final confirmation. Klein was unable to discern the words on it due to his poor angle, but he was certain that there was no drawing of the fool with his gorgeous clothes and splendid headdress. Ahem. There's nothing wrong with it. Dunn closed the notebook and held it securely. Then he looked at Ayer and company. "Let's store this notebook in sealed artifact 2-049 behind Tinjin's Chinese gate. We can wait until all of you are recovered or Backlund sends someone over." Upon hearing that, Klein felt a little disappointed once again, but also felt happy. He wished to see the Antigonus family's notebook once more and figure out the reason for the death of the original Klein, Welch, and Naya. However, he also felt that the ancient item was filled with misfortune. It often brought catastrophe, so he did not dare touch it. Handing it to the church's headquarters and sealing it is considered the best choice. He secretly heaved a sigh of relief. "All right." Ayer, Harson, Borgia, and Lorata nodded in unison. They then turned around and arrived beside sealed artifact 2-049. They woke each other up and stuffed the puppet, which had resumed moving, into the black chest with an opening as they monitored it strictly. "Everything is back to normal." Ayer sounded a little more relaxed. Inside the dimly lit black chest, the puppet wrapped in oil-stained cloth flipped over with its body creaking as it aligned its clown-painted face with the light source. On the creepy face, under the black pupilless eyes, two hardly noticeable crimson cracks appeared. Meanwhile, Dunn, Leonard, and Klein, who had mustered his courage, began searching the suited clown's corpse. They found paper flowers, handkerchiefs, poker cards, glass pieces, and all sorts of strange items. However, apart from that, he did not seem to carry anything of worth or potential clues. Other than the wallet with 70 to 80 pounds and 10 plus solely. Klein secretly sighed. With money in mind, he immediately looked down and inspected himself. His face nearly fell literally. His formal suit that cost several pounds had torn in 5 to 6 spots, which required mending due to his rolling on the ground. Furthermore, it was covered in dust and dirt stains. Dunn shot him a glance as the corner of his lips curved up. "Losses during a mission can be reimbursed." Reimbursed. Upon hearing the term invented by Emperor Roselle, Klein instantly felt wonderful. Yeah. This suit just needs some proper cleaning and mending before it can be worn again. It will still be presentable. When the reimbursement comes, I can buy another set and I can take turns wearing them. I am not the kind of person that uses a reimbursement for something other than what it was intended for. However, I should consider getting a set of clothes for combat in the future, such as a black windbreaker like Captain. Clothes with slightly poorer material would be much cheaper than a tuxedo. He has the reason why the bastard Leonard doesn't like wearing formal suits been due to him having such considerations. Let Fry take care of the dead body. We'll see if he can find what the man originally looked like or find any relevant clues. Dunn touched the suited clown's face paint with his gloves. Then they searched the innermost warehouse and saw that there were splotches of bloody flesh that looked like they had been smashed by boulders. They also saw one white bone after another that had been strewn everywhere. Ray Bieber was absorbing the power in the notebook via an ancient ritual, just like how we would consume a higher-level sequence potion. A ritual like that is full of danger. It must be performed in an environment isolated from all disturbances, and the ritual would have required him to enter a deep sleep for a certain amount of time. That was probably why he had yet to leave Tingen. Dunn guessed at the possibilities after inspecting the warehouse. Upon hearing such a description, Lorata laughed. Her black hair contrasted sharply with her pale face. Such a pity we awakened him ahead of time. His anger at being woken up truly left a deep impression on us. This is a kind of losing control. Dunn looked towards Klein and told him as both an explanation and a lecture. Why didn't he just leave Tingen and try to absorb it elsewhere? Asked a perplexed Klein. Iyer laughed and pointed to his head. People influenced by ancient or sinister powers often are lacking in this department. At that moment, Dunn inhaled and said while hiding his pain, Leonard, you are still in good condition. Stay here and do not allow ordinary people to come close. The rest of us will immediately search for items among Ray Bieber's remains. We will return with them and the sealed artifact as well as the Antigonus family's notebook. We will then get Fry Royale and the police to come here. All right, answered Leonard with a relaxed expression when he heard Dunn's suggestion. Following that, everyone walked out of the warehouse and came close to where Monster Bieber had self-destructed. With him at the origin, they began searching outwards radially. Captain, what are we looking for? Klein looked at the rotting flesh and blood that was strewn everywhere. He held back his urge to retch as he looked at Dunn Smith beside him ponderingly. Dunn did not look up. Instead, he used his deep gray eyes to sweep the ground. Awakening ahead of time, losing control and becoming a monster. This means that Ray Bieber did not fully absorb the Beyonder powers provided by the notebook. It also means that a part of his body is considered extraordinary, making it prime material. If you ever encounter something similar, make sure not to miss out on doing a search. It might be a relatively important item. So that's the case. Klein nodded slightly in enlightenment. In the blink of an eye, he thought of another matter. If the part where Monster Bieber had concentrated the Beyonder powers were some indescribable part, wouldn't that be awkward? Wouldn't it be extremely disgusting to concoct it into a potion? Just as Klein's mind wandered, Borja with his sharp eagle-like eyes suddenly shouted. Found it. Ahem. Dunn and company immediately turned and closed in. Driven by his curiosity, Klein walked over to Borja with a quickened pace. Soon he saw the item before Borja. It was a grayish-white item about the size of a fist. Its surface was filled with gullies and it looked soft but ductile. It looked like a brain that had been extracted out of a living being. Although Klein was unable to make out the extraordinariness of the blob of grayish-white, he was certain that Borja had not made a mistake since it had remained intact despite the violent explosion it had undergone. Dunn carefully observed it and squatted down. As he extended and bent his right arm, he used his black-gloved left hand to carefully grab the grayish-white item. The moment it was touched, the blob of grayish-white immediately spread out into an extremely sticky liquid. At that moment, Iyer Harson took out a tin-colored square case, removed the cigarettes from them and placed them into his pocket. Then he handed the square case to Dunn and smiled. I know you only like pipes. Dunn chuckled and took the square case. Then he poured the grayish-white sticky liquid into the case for temporary storage. After storing it away, Everyone did a cursory sweep of the area. After confirming that they had not missed out anything, they left. When they came out, they saw the horses digging their hooves into the ground, clearly spooked and nervous. They had nearly escaped their reins. "I'll drive." Borja covered his mouth with his hand and coughed softly. "I know you are good at placating animals," said Iyer with a smiling nod. After boarding the carriage, Dunn, Lorata, Iyer, Harson and Klein, who continued their arm exercises, temporarily had nothing to say as they fell into silence. When the trotting of the horses sounded while the carriage wheeled off, Dunn looked at Klein and deliberated over his words before saying, "I know you are filled with curiosity about the Antigonus family's notebook. You wish to understand what happened." "No, not at all," Klein subconsciously denied. It was an ancient relic filled with misfortune. Without giving him time to answer, Dunn continued and said, "However, I have to first report this to the Holy Cathedral. Only after they determine the confidentiality level of the notebook can we consider if this can be shown to you." "No problem." Klein gave a short and simple reply. Dunn continued his arm exercises as he thought before saying, "I once promised that you can be made a formal member of the Nighthawks when we confirm that Ray Bieber is a descendant of the Antigonus family clan. Now, not only have we determined Ray Bieber's identity, we have even eliminated the monster and spoiled the Secret Order's conspiracy. In this entire process, your performance was outstanding. You personally killed a member of an evil organization. Therefore, I will fulfill my promise and immediately make an application to the Holy Cathedral. We'll wait for their approval. Right, I forgot something important. I still need to ask if you are agreeable to it. Mr. Klein Moretti, are you willing to formally join the Tingen Nighthawks as one of its members? Your salary will increase several-fold, reaching £6 a week. Furthermore, you will get a raise every subsequent year. Your salary will be paid by the church and Owa County's police department equally. You will also gain the identity of a probationary inspector. It will be very useful at times. As a support-type Beyonder, you do not always need to face enemies, but you will have to guard Cheney's Gate once a week. Without the squad's permission, you are not to leave Tingen without permission. Furthermore, you have to keep this a secret from your family." By the time Dunn finished listing the restrictions and benefits, Klein was already thinking deeply for more than 10 seconds. "I wish to become a formal Nighthawk. Only by doing so could he continue to gain more access to mystery, such as the situation regarding the Secret Order." After reading the gathered Roselle diaries, Klein had some changes in thoughts about himself. Being skilled in mysticism knowledge to seek a way home was an immutable goal of his. Raising his strength further to more safely make the mysterious space above the gray fog do his bidding before using it to return home was a new addition to his goals. Just as Emperor Roselle said, simply relying on external powers was very dangerous. Furthermore, after becoming a seer and obtaining Beyonder powers, Klein sensed that he had a better grasp of the mysterious space. For example, he could pull another person into the gathering. This forced him to consider what possibly beneficial changes would happen to the mysterious space above the gray fog when he reached Sequence 8, Sequence 7, or an even higher sequence. Of course, Klein knew very well that this was built on the premise that he completely resolved the side effects of the seer potion. He could not rush or be rash. "Very well. Once the Holy Cathedral approves of it, you will become one of us." Dunn's gray eyes were tinted with a hint of joy. At that moment, Iyer Harson, who was listening in, interrupted. "Klein, don't mind me calling you Klein. Your performance today was really excellent. You managed to kill a Beyonder from the Secret Order. I even suspect that he has reached Sequence 7. How did you do it? I really find it incredulous." The question has finally been raised. Having long prepared for it, Klein acted as though he was organizing his thoughts. He knew that it was indeed incredible and enigmatic that he had killed a Beyonder that ran rings around Dunn, Iyer, and Lorata. Iyer and company were not blind or dumb, so it was a matter of time before they inquired about the process. However, he never expected them to wait till this moment. That's right. Captain and Mr. Harson were previously injured and their situations could have worsened at any time. At that moment, any matter that could result in conflict had to be put on hold. It was to prevent me from acting desperately because of my exposed secret. Only after I expressed my attitude and showed that I was willing to be a Nighthawk were they at ease enough to ask. How crafty. They did not have any obvious communication between themselves, but they had made the same tacit decision. Klein answered as though in thought, "It's an extremely lucky event. The clown in the tuxedo had made a fatal misjudgment. Back then, sealed artifact 2-049 was thrown near me as a result of the explosion's blast. It looked about 5 to 6 meters from me, but it was only a crude observation. It was very easy to come to the conclusion that I was within the sealed artifact's area of influence. And back then I was feeling faint because of the explosion. My actions turned sluggish and looked as though I was being controlled. It was unknown when that suited clown came close to me in an invisible state. He tried to entice me by offering to save me and the corresponding sequence 8 clown of the seer potion. He wanted me to help him retrieve the Antigonus family's notebook. Right, he said that the secret order is in control of the seer potion's corresponding sequence pathway, and that he was once a seer. Klein recounted the situation back then in detail. He even described the theories he had back then, including how he believed that the suited clown had divined that taking the notebook would be an extremely risky endeavor. Thus he had changed his plans. Of course, all the truths were used to conceal the lie made in the beginning, that he had been controlled by sealed artifact 2-049. Divined that it was extremely risky to retrieve the notebook? Yes, it's indeed highly risky. However, the risk was actually because of you, said Lorata with a chuckle as she covered her mouth. His divination was right, but it cost him to end up in a fatal situation. This sure is an interesting account. Klein was taken aback before he nodded seriously. Indeed. Divination is never crystal clear. And that vagueness only means that an interpretation can be wrong. Yes, I have to take note of that. How did you finish him off after that? Asked Dunn while he did his arm exercises and leaned back. Klein smiled. I pretended to agree to him and made him awaken me. However, he did not dare enter the effective range of the sealed artifact. He stayed 2 to 3 meters away and used a strange paper slip in an attempt to push me. I seized the opportunity and pulled at his paper slip, causing him to be thrown into 2-049's effective range. I then complemented it with repeated shots and completed my goal. It's quite an embarrassing matter for me. I didn't even have the confidence of hitting him despite being only 2 to 3 meters away from him. Iron nodded slightly. With his evasive abilities, a distance of 2 to 3 meters is not an absolute guarantee. You might be able to strike him but fail to hit him in a vital spot. That would only make things worse. Your choice back then was impeccable. Can even be said to be outstanding. If I were in your shoes, I might not have been able to do it better than you. He did not ask further. After all, the suited clown's entry into the sealed artifact 2-049's area of influence basically sealed his fate. He became a living target. The subsequent sequence of seer is clown. How odd, Dunn suddenly said with a sigh. Ayar Harson added, exactly, it is hard to imagine that the subsequent sequence of seer would be clown. According to normal logic, no one would link them together. Is that strange? I remember that quite a number of sequence potions also seem to lack similarities between their different levels. Lorata covered her mouth as she yawned. It was obvious that her injuries were more severe. Not even Goddess's gaze could help her to maintain her vibrant energy. No, Lorata. This is completely different. Even if the other sequence potions are lacking a connection, we can also find common points if viewed from a different angle. However, I cannot comprehend it for seer and clown at all, said Ayar Harson as he shook his head and sighed. Klein listened to their discussion and laughed. No, there's still a common point. What? Ayar asked curiously. Even Dunn's arm exercises clearly slowed down. Klein replied without hesitation, be it a seer or a clown, both of them can be found at the circus. Ayar, Dunn and Lorata were stunned. Quite a good answer. I like young man like you. Lorata was the first to return to her senses as she burst out laughing. Ayar also smiled as he shook his head. In this era, the number of gentlemen who are equipped with the spirit of self-deprecation is decreasing. Thankfully we have met one today. Do you think I like to engage in self-deprecation? It's not like I figured out any commonality between the two. Klein complained internally as he replied with a wry smile. I only wish that the potions of the sequence pathway would not have names like beast tamer, acrobat, or magician. That would really form a circus. Furthermore, it's a one-man circus. Haha. Dunn and company were immediately amused. It filled the carriage with a joyous atmosphere. The carriage proceeded straight for Zetland Street. Klein, who was not injured, was the first to enter Blackthorn Security Company. Goddess! What happened to you? Why are you like that? Roseanne exclaimed when she caught sight of him. Klein looked down at his dirty and tattered suit. He replied with his heart aching, there are always all kinds of accidents during a mission. Thankfully, the goddess blessed us and it ended beautifully. Praise the lady. Roseanne devoutly drew the crimson moon across her chest. Before waiting for Klein to continue, she asked, do you need us to hide in the third floor again? Is the sealed artifact really that dangerous? Trust me. It's far more dangerous than you can imagine, replied Klein with a lingering fear. If not for his even more mysterious luck enhancement ritual, he would have perished under the proverbial hands of 2-049. Goddess. Roseanne's lips quivered as though she had still a million things to say or questions to ask, but in consideration of how the captain was waiting downstairs, she held back her compulsion. She informed Mrs. Oriana and company to head upstairs to the third floor. The neighbors of Blackthorn Security Company were either estates of the church, or devout clergymen who vaguely knew of the situation. When all the civilian staff dispersed, Klein did not rush to the entertainment room to inform the other Nighthawks. He immediately returned and helped the captain and the rest escort sealed artifact 2-049, Monster Bieber's remnants, and the Antigonus family's notebook to the second floor. Through the partition, Dunn pushed open the entertainment room's door and said to the two Nighthawks who were playing Gwent cards, Fry Royal, both of you are to immediately head to the harbor's Tyrell warehouse and aid Leonard in dealing with the aftermath. All right. Royale, with her raven-black hair and cold expression, was the first to stand up. Corpse Collector Fry, with his black hair, blue eyes and pale skin, stood up next. They put down their Gwent cards and walked out the entertainment room, and when they passed through the partition they clearly paused. Wait, Dunn shouted, not letting down their expectations. What else is there? Sleepless Royale turned her head back and asked without an expression. Remember to inform the police. Let them seal off the road. Prevent anyone from coming close until you are done with the scene and move the corpse back, Dunn said, smacking his forehead. All right. Royale turned around and took 2 steps before pausing once again. She turned her head, blinked and confirmed coldly, Captain, is there nothing else? No, Dunn answered categorically. Royale nodded unnoticeably and walked towards the entrance. As for Corpse Collector Fry, who exuded coldness and darkness, he maintained his adequate pace. At that moment, Dunn added, remember to tell Rosanna, Mrs. Oriana, and company that they can come down. No problem. Fry calmly replied as though no emotions stirred in him. Klein watched as the two Nighthawks walked out the door and went upstairs before heaving a secret sigh of relief. He followed the captain and the rest underground. They proceeded straight to Cheney's gate. As Dunn gestured for Sleepless Kenley to open Cheney's gate, he instructed Klein, go to the armory and get old Neil here. We need his ritualistic magic to heal ourselves. As the effects of the medicine began to wear off, his mental state gradually waned. All right. Klein did not wait for the captain to continue as he added, I will watch the armory in old Neil's place. I will also request for at least 20 demon-hunting bullets and also wait for the Holy Cathedral's approval, curbing my curiosity about the Antigonus family's notebook. Dunn was instantly at a loss for words. Captain, is there anything else? Asked Klein with a smile after beating Dunn to it. Dunn shook his head and remained speechless. He pulled out his cane and turned around. After walking a certain distance, Klein turned into the armory and recounted the happenings generally to old Neil, who was drinking plain water. He became a monster that lost control. You even killed a Beyonder. Old Neil quickly tidied up his desk. It's like I'm listening to the script of a play. he mumbled as he circled around the desk and walked straight towards the corridor without waiting for Klein's answer. Klein asked out of curiosity, "Mr. Neal, doesn't the church have real restorative medicine? Why would ritualistic magic be needed? No medicine made with ordinary ingredients can provide the permanent restorative effects of a ritual. Extraordinary ingredients are very rare, and most of them are not suitable for restorative medicine," Old Neal explained casually. "You should know about Goddess's gaze, right? When the medicine is first made via a ritual, it would be a standard, real restorative medicine. But every minute after its completion, its effect evaporates until little of its efficacy is left." "I see," Klein nodded disappointedly. As a former keyboard warrior, an avid gamer, it was a habit to yearn for a medicine with magical healing properties. He watched Old Neal leave and sat down, taking in the tranquility that he had not had in a very long time. In the midst of his piece, he recalled the tragic death of the suited clown. He recalled himself shooting coldly, the gruesome wound and the spewing of fresh blood. Klein's body shivered as he felt discomfort. He first stood up, then sat down, then slowly repeated the process. He also did some pacing back and forth in between. Phew. He let out a breath and decided to occupy himself with something so that he could stop thinking of those negative images. Klein took off his silk hat and formal suit. He then took out a handkerchief and a brush to clean off the dirt and mud. After an uncertain amount of time, he heard Old Neal's familiar footsteps. Old Neal's gait involved him walking on his heels, and it made a distinctive noise as he ambled down the hall. "How tiring," Old Neal complained as he walked into the room. "Tell the rest that no one is to come here within the next hour." "I need to rest," he instructed casually, glancing towards Klein. "Why don't you rest upstairs and I keep watch here?" Klein suggested out of kindness. Old Neal shook his head. "It's too noisy upstairs. Rosen is a lady who just can't stop talking." "All right." Klein did not insist. He put on his coat and hat, picked up his cane and returned to the corridor. Then he pulled the armory's door ajar. Pip, pip, pip. He slowly walked on the empty path when he suddenly saw many rooms he had never seen previously by the side. "There is a secret door here." Klein stopped at a spot around a bend as he looked at the room. He discovered that corpse collector Fry had already returned. He was carefully examining a completely dissected corpse. Klein's heart stirred as he mustered his courage and approached the room. He knocked lightly on the open door. Knock, knock, knock. Fry stopped his actions and turned around, looking over with his blue but ice-cold eyes. "Sorry for disturbing you. I just wish to know if this is a corpse of a Beyonder," asked Klein as he controlled his tone. "Yes." Fry's lips opened and closed, but only spat out a single word. Klein's gaze reached beyond him and landed on the corpse. Indeed, he discovered the familiar gruesome wound on the forehead. "It's that suited clown." Klein secretly exhaled and said, "Any discoveries?" "No," answered Fry in an abnormally simple manner. The mood instantly turned awkward. Just as Klein was about to bid farewell, Fry took the initiative to say, "If you feel uncomfortable, you can come in to take a look. You will discover that it's only a corpse." "Afraid that I'll be traumatized?" Klein nodded in thought. "All right." He entered the room and came in front of the long white-clothed table as he looked at the corpse. The suited clown's red, yellow, and white paint had been cleaned off, revealing an unfamiliar face that did not look anything special. He was in his 30s and had black hair and a high nose bridge. At that moment, Fry went to a square table by the corner of the wall and picked up a pencil and piece of paper. He returned to the corpse and placed the paper down and began drawing with the pencil. Klein glanced at it in curiosity and found that Fry was sketching the suited clown's head. It did not take long before Fry stopped moving the pencil. On the piece of paper there was a lifelike portrait. Compared to the corpse, the only difference was the lack of a wound with the addition of blue eyes. "What a talented genius." Klein marveled in surprise. "I never expected you to be that good at sketching. My dream was to become an artist before becoming a nighthawk." Fry's tone was completely placid. "Then why don't you fulfill your dreams?" asked Klein curiously. Fry put down his pencil and said with the suited clown's portrait in hand, My father was a priest of the goddess. He wished that I become a priest. It's a presentable job. You became a priest? Klein asked in surprise. He found it unimaginable that Fry could become a priest with his personality and the vibes he exuded. Yeah, I did quite an okay job. Fry wore a cold expression as the corners of his mouth curled up a little as he replied. Later, I encountered and experienced some things and ended up a nighthawk. Klein did not plan on infringing on his privacy, so he asked, You were once a priest of the goddess, so why not choose to be a sleepless? A personal reason, answered Fry frankly. Furthermore, Madame Daly is a good role model. Klein nodded, and just as he was about to change the subject, he heard Fry say, Help me watch this room. I have to immediately hand the sketch to Captain. Closing a secret door is very troublesome. All right. Although Klein was a little afraid facing a corpse alone, he braved his fear in agreement. With Fry gone, the room turned quiet. The corpse laid there as Klein's heart turned heavy. He took a few breaths and, in a bid to defeat his fears, approached the long table. The suited clown lay there silently with his pale face. His eyes were tightly shut and he had lost all signs of breathing. Apart from the gruesome wound, he emitted the unique coldness of a dead man. Klein observed for a moment as his emotions gradually settled as he was calming down. He swept his gaze and discovered a strange brand on the suited clown's wrist. Gathering his courage, he extended his hand to touch it, hoping to turn it around to see it more clearly. Just as the ice-cold touch reached from Klein's fingertips to his brain, the pale palm that had lost all vibrancy shot up suddenly, grabbing him by the wrist. Grabbed at his wrist tightly. Klein instantly felt his hair stand on end as the icy hand tightened around his wrist. He instinctively pulled his wrist back in a desperate attempt to escape. A heavy sensation bore down on him as Klein used every fiber of strength in his entire body to yank his arm back. Bam! The pale, naked corpse was yanked so forcefully to the side that it fell from the autopsy table. However, the white ice-cold finger's grip remained firmly latched onto Klein's wrist. Klein momentarily lost the ability to think. The only thought that went through his mind was to draw his revolver and riddle the corpse in holes. However, as he could not retract his dominant hand, he threw his black cane and desperately tried to retrieve his revolver from his holster to no avail. At that moment, the corpse's eyes rose, revealing a pair of calm blue eyes. His mouth moved as he muttered, Hornacis, Hornacis, Hornacis. After those 3 words were said, Klein was completely flustered as he felt that the fingers gripping onto his wrist began to loosen before dropping limp. The suited clown's eyes were shut once again as though nothing had happened at all. If the pale corpse wasn't lying on the stone floor, Klein would have imagined that he had been struck by a hallucination spell. He staggered backwards a few steps and felt that most of his body was trembling as a result of the shock and fear. Phew! Phew! Klein gasped for air as he slowly regained control of his mental facilities. He looked at the corpse on the ground in alarm and fear. He drew his revolver and carefully retreated from the room, one step at a time. After confirming that the corpse was motionless, he took a glance at his wrist of the hand holding onto his revolver. There were 5 deep red finger marks imprinted on his wrist. They silently described his encounter. Klein calmed down as vulgarities filled his mind. King hell. I almost died from the shock. After panting for more than 10 seconds, he began assembling items in his mind to quickly compose himself. He carefully recalled everything that he encountered and pieced them together. Although he did not understand the reason for the suited clown's resurrection, he acutely noticed an important point. The corpse had repeated the words, Hornacis. It's Hornacis again, Klein knitted his brows. The Antigonus family's notebook has records of a nation of the Evernight in the Hornacis mountain range. While in cogitation or spirit vision, I would hear sounds that I shouldn't be able to hear, and among those sounds is the word Hornacis. Is the answer to all these questions on the Hornacis mountain range? There might be massive danger lurking there. For example, an evil god might be sealed within and was using various forms of attraction to achieve freedom. While considering this, Klein carefully entered the room and touched the corpse a few times to verify that it was completely dead. He didn't want corpse collector Fry to see him mess up the place, so he mustered his courage to move the corpse back onto the autopsy table. Klein couldn't help but feel as though his heart was in his mouth throughout the process. The slightest movement could snap his tense nerves. Furthermore, the ice-cold feeling given out by the corpse felt particularly disgusting. After finishing the mission with great difficulty, he recalled the reason he approached the corpse. Therefore, he focused on the suited clown's wrist and looked at the strange brand. It was unknown when the brand had slipped off, shrinking into a spherical blob of blood which had tint of blue. The spherical blob of blood was the size of a thumb. It floated in midair silently in defiance of the laws of physics. "What is this?" Klein muttered, but he didn't dare to touch it rashly. He had no intention of hiding the strange blood sphere. Firstly, he didn't know if it was a good or bad thing. Secondly, he was certain that Fry, who had examined the corpse, would have long discovered the brand on the wrist. It was even likely that he knew what the strange blood sphere was. And even if Fry doesn't know, reporting it to Captain and letting the Nighthawks research it is definitely better than me making random attempts. That was Klein's train of thought. Being in an organization meant he had to know how to make use of the organization's powers to its fullest. Klein waited nervously for a few minutes before he saw the black-haired, blue-eyed and thin-lipped Fry return. He instantly noticed the strange blood sphere, and asked Klein a question he had previously asked himself. "What is this?" "No idea." Klein shook his head honestly. He recounted what had happened without hiding anything. "The brand slipped off into a blood sphere." Fry nodded, seemingly deep in thought. "The corpse of a Beyonder always tends to have some strange transformations." He looked up and said to Klein, "Bring the captain here. Inform him about the contents." That the corpse murmured as well. "All right." Klein was already itching to leave. "You don't have to return with the captain," Fry added. "I believe you won't like to see what happens next." As he spoke, he picked up a silver surgical knife beside him. Klein nodded with some lingering fear. "I was hoping you'd say that." He picked up his cane, wore his hat and hobbled over to the Cheney's gate. At the keeper's room he saw the no longer frail Captain Dunn. After Dunn heard his recollection of what happened, he nodded indiscernibly. "I'll report the matter to the higher-ups and let the Holy Cathedral deal with it. Maybe they'll send people to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range to take a look." Klein answered briefly in confirmation. Seeing that only Sleepless Kenley and the captain were in the keeper's room, he casually asked, "Are Mr. Eyre and the others resting?" Dunn nodded and said, "Eyre and Borgia are at St. Selena Cathedral. Lorata is probably looking for a coffee shop." "Coffee shop? Madame Lorata hasn't recovered from her injuries, right?" Klein asked in surprise. Dunn massaged his nose bridge and said with a laugh, "Lorata has 3 hobbies: coffee, dessert and maidservants. She says she needs these 3 things to speed up her recovery." "Maidservants?" Klein asked, perplexed. "Does Madame Lorata have a particular fetish?" Dunn shook his head helplessly and said, "She likes maidservants." "Yeah, that's right. Furthermore, she likes ones with big breasts. She sure is weird." Klein had no idea what kind of expression he should show in response. Dunn didn't delay any further as he headed out the keeper's room. As Klein watched his back, he silently waited for him to turn. Meanwhile, he noticed at the corner of his eye that Sleepless Kenley had fished out his pocket watch and opened it. 3, 2, 1. The moment Klein finished counting down silently, Dunn stopped and turned around. "Another thing I forgot. Klein, you went through a lot today. Once you relax, you'll feel exhausted. There's no need for you to be here in the afternoon. Go back and get some rest. Tomorrow, I'll submit the application listing the detailed losses." "All right. Don't worry too much about your killing of a Beyonder. Killing him was equivalent to saving more lives. As a matter of fact, I'm actually feeling much better." Klein silently exhaled. Dunn nodded slightly, and just as he turned around, he smacked himself in the forehead. "I've also handed the Beyonder sketch to Leonard. He and the police department are in charge of the follow-up investigations. I believe that the Beyonder must have rode on carriages, eaten food and had somewhere to stay. Wherever he goes, whatever he touches, whatever he leaves behind, even unconsciously, will serve as a silent witness against him. Emperor Rosel's words are truly sensible. Yes. Klein answered stupefied. After the captain walked far away, he left the keeper's room and slowly walked to the second floor. Along the way, he suddenly recalled something as he experienced an additional bout of fear. That suited clown claimed that the secret order controlled the corresponding sequence pathway of seers. Even if he was exaggerating and they didn't have the higher sequence potion formulas, they definitely have the lower sequence ones. It also means that they have a number of seers. Then wouldn't they divine that I killed the suited clown and secretly exact revenge against me? If they can't deal with the Nighthawks, can't they deal with me, a seer without any direct measures against enemies? Klein stopped in the stairwell and began thinking about the problem seriously. Soon he discovered that he was worrying over nothing. Firstly, the secret order doesn't know who are members of the Nighthawks. Secondly, even if they know one or two, they definitely wouldn't include a civilian staff member like me. Thirdly, under the present circumstances, unless they have a prophet, there's no way they can divine who the murderer is. He heaved a sigh of relief and left the Blackthorn Security Company. He took a public carriage back to Daffodil Street. Even though he hadn't eaten lunch yet, he still lacked the appetite. After entering his bedroom, Klein removed his damaged suit first. Then he took off his half-top hat, got into bed and tried to go to sleep. His mind remained active as though his entire existence couldn't relax. His mind wasn't repeating the scene of him shooting the suited clown to death, but of the scene of him moving the corpse and that hair-raising experience. He no longer felt uncomfortable about killing for the first time, but more of a disgust when he thought about it. This was probably Fry's goal. He hoped that I would approach the corpse and face it directly to overcome my trauma. But even though the trauma from before is gone, I've been traumatized by something new. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh as he gradually felt his nerves calm down. He had no idea when he dozed off, but when he woke up his stomach was groaning in protest. I feel like I can eat an entire horse. Klein muttered as he looked at the sun setting in the west as though the sky was alit. Changing into old but comfortable casual clothes, he briskly walked to the first floor. Before he could consider what to make for dinner, he heard the door open. The corners of his mouth curled up at the thought. Ever since she began taking the public carriage, his sister no longer returned home late. The key twisted as the door opened. Melissa walked in with her bag that contained her books and stationery. She looked at the kitchen and said, "Klein, there's a letter for you. It's from your mentor." "A letter from mentor?" "Right. I wrote to him asking about the relevant historical situation of the Hornacis main peak." Klein was taken aback at first before he recalled the matter.